Hi, Doovid. We're live, and I will be sharing this link on Twitter and Facebook.
Great. Thank God, Claire. You already started live.
Yes. I just wanted to say how very sorry I am to hear about the Samantha Woll, whose death you announced yesterday on Week in Review. It must be very distressing, especially if it's somebody you know, and especially if it's a woman. I've just read a report of it on the Jewish Chronicle, and yes, she seems a very pretty pretty lady.
God forbid, a wonderful woman. I didn't realize you were going to start right away. If you want to talk for like a minute while I finish finishing my lunch.
Um, shall I just read
Yeah, go ahead. You could just
the
read that, and I'll be ready in a minute.
all right? I'll read the Jewish Chronicle article. Um, Synagogue president stabbed to death in Michigan. The president of a Detroit synagogue board has been stabbed to death outside her home. Police were called to Samantha Woll's home on Saturday morning and followed a trail of blood that led to her body. She had multiple stab wounds. Police say a motive for the attack is not yet known. Woll, 40, was president of the board of the Isaac Agree downtown synagogue and worked to build bridges in the community between Muslims and Jews. It comes as Rashida Tlaib, the district's congresswoman, faces stern criticism and a potential ban by Israel for continuing to blame the Al-Ali Gaza hospital bombing on Israel. US intelligence and numerous experts have laid the blame with a failed Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. The synagogue said in a statement, "We are shocked and saddened to learn of the unexpected death of Samantha Woll, our board president. May her memory be a blessing." Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan said Woll's death has left a huge hole in the Detroit community. In a statement, Duggan said he and Woll were celebrating the newly renovated synagogue together just a few weeks ago. "This entire city joins with the family and friends in mourning her tragic death," he said. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel said, "Sam was as kind a person as I've ever known. She was driven by her sincere love of her community, state, and country." Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin said Woll worked for her to help set up the office and lead it throughout her first term. She said, "My heart aches that we have lost someone so dedicated to serving others in such a senseless act. I'll miss her relentless desire to serve and her bright smile seemingly everywhere across the Detroit area."
Okay. Did you share this on Twitter?
I'm just about to. My computer's a bit slow at the moment. Yes, I am doing it now.
I'll just mention I haven't seen Samuel for maybe even 3 years since COVID-19, and although I did see her like hundreds of times. We prayed together at the downtown synagogue, definitely like over 100 times. Ate Friday meal together, um, chanted together, went to Jewish communal events, activist events, um, interfaith events, um, probably like tens of times. And I would even say like I probably even spoke directly with her over tens of hours. Um,
Mhm.
that, but the synagogue changed quite a bit, like since 2017 when they hired the new rabbi, liberal rabbi, and then COVID-19. Um, Everything got closed down, and then they started the construction project. They raised money, which she was integral in. She became president, I think 2000, maybe it was just recently, 2022 or 2020. But they raised a whole bunch of money, like 5 million, $6 million, and they completely renovated the building. So they closed it down for like over a year, and they were doing services in a church. And then they just finally reopened the newly renovated synagogue uh, a few months ago. So I have not, I don't think I've seen her face to face, since COVID-19 lockdown started. And,
Hmm.
if it's interesting, I could trace out kind of my path to working with the downtown synagogue, my interactions with her, somewhat like a little bit of intersectionality where we worked together, but then eventually, the synagogue got pushed to the left to a feminist level, and then I was kind of like, um,
Did you feel excluded
um,
because of the feminist thing you just mentioned?
yeah, I was basically like, excluded or forced out in a way that, um, did you successfully tag me in a tweet? Just so I share this, if you're haven't been
Oh,
able to do
right,
it.
right. Okay. Let me tag you. Yes. So, oh, so was she behind the synagogue to the left? Was she responsible for that, or was she just one of the,
Well, yeah, I mean,
or
not
was
to,
she
I mean, God
helplessly
forbid
led?
her murder or something. I mean, I'm nothing to do. I mean, well, unfortunately, I was just watching the Detroit Police Department press conference, and although they haven't released a suspect name, um, they have basically said that it's very unlikely it was a hate crime related to anti-Semitism, and they believe they didn't say it in so many words because the case is still open, but they implied, God forbid, it was probably somebody she knew and possibly led into her apartment on her own. I mean, say like she was found stabbed outside. God forbid there was a blood trail leading back into her um, townhouse in Detroit, and there was no sign of break in, uh, no sign of struggle. So they're thinking that it's likely, and they also said there's no sign of danger. They don't think, like, God forbid, it could have been a
She
crime of
probably
theft.
knew her attacker.
Yeah, it doesn't
Does it
appear to
sound
be a
like she knew
robbery
her
or a hate
attacker?
crime. It appears to be, well, they
Hmm.
didn't say that directly because they didn't want to interfere with the investigation. They haven't made any arrests. They haven't released a motive, but from the nature of the crime, they say, yeah, it's likely that there was no forced entry, and the crime happened in her apartment with no sign of struggle. So the likelihood that it was someone she knew and even had led into her apartment. So, God forbid, um, we could celebrate her life and say all the good things she did. Maybe it'll be revealed in the next few days. Maybe they'll catch a suspect and prosecute them. Um, but and like, I don't know. I said I haven't seen her in 3 years. I didn't know her necessarily at a personal level, and say that, but say the nature of the crime, it's most likely it was someone who knew her, and very likely also that someone she may have voluntarily led
Had
into
had
her
a
apartment.
relationship with. Hmm.
Well, it's all speculation, but saying that the police have unequivocally said that that's almost no evidence. That it's a hate crime or anti-Semitism, and the evidence, although they didn't, they said the investigation is still ongoing. They haven't made any arrests. The evidence is pointing to a completely different nature of the crime that has nothing to do with a hate crime or anti-Semitism. and so that would all be speculation. God forbid if she had a
Mhm.
live-in boyfriend, if she had a roommate, or if she had. Um, yeah, we don't have any of that information. The police haven't released it, but in terms
Mhm.
of it making national news, obviously it's a horrible tragedy, and the reason it's making national news does not seem to match the nature of the crime. Although, there's still possibilities, and the press conference, like almost all the press was like, "How can you be sure it's not anti-Semitism?" And the police were basically saying like, "We have a good idea of how and why this happened, but they can't reveal it yet because the case is still pending. They haven't made an arrest." They made it sound like they had a prime suspect, um, but they couldn't reveal that yet, which is probably leaning towards, God forbid, how it could have happened. Like, God forbid she was a nice woman, she wasn't dispute related, but if it's someone she knew that did it to her, God forbid, and it could even turn it out maybe it was a fellow Jew. I mean, God forbid. Or but the police haven't released that information. But just to say that they unequivocally said that it doesn't look like it's a hate crime or anything to do with anti-Semitism or the war in Israel. But that's why you've heard about it. That's why it's making national media attention.
Yes, yes. So I think Muslims would be relieved. I mean, of course, it's not to be murdered, but perhaps um, oh, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, except that it is. Is it better to be murdered for personal reasons or political reasons? I don't even know. But as you say, it will all come out in the wash. And
Well,
the
God
media
forbid.
are
I mean,
maybe not that responsible in trying to make everything out to be a hate crime and implicating Muslims when it may not be the case.
God forbid it. There's theology around a murder. So, if God forbid she had been martyred for being a Jew, many people say like she makes it straight to heaven, um, and different theological implications about special prayers or memory for martyrs. God forbid if it was, God forbid, like her boyfriend or something that did it to her. Um, you might still be able to call her a martyr, but you're saying if it was a domestic disagreement with her boyfriend, God forbid, uh, that would completely be a different nature than what it's being put out to, and it would be, to the Jewish community, it would still be tragic in the same way that she was a wonderful person, had an important role in the community. She was probably the most senior ranking Democrat in Metro Detroit. I mean, she was a
Mhm.
congressional staffer. She was, she started back, I think, even before Hillary Clinton. But I mean, she got heavily involved in the Hillary Clinton campaign, and she may have been involved in Democratic politics, but she was one of the senior ranking people in the Democratic Party of Michigan. She had been a congressional staffer for Elisa Slotkin, and she had been in the campaign for the Attorney General Dana um, Nessel, and she was on the board of directors of probably like tens of different organizations, and she supported Black Lives Matters, refugees, um, economic justice, things like water shutoffs, housing. She was a liberal activist. I'm not sure if she was active in the abortion activism. Um, I'm not actually sure if she was or not. Um, she wasn't necessarily a Palestinian activist, because she was part of AJC and mainstream American Jewish organizations that tiered left, but they still tier pro-Zionist. And as you could see, like President Biden or most of the Democrats uh, being pretty one-sided in favor of Israel versus Palestine, that my guess would be, she didn't go as far to favor the Palestinians at all. And I mean, even the police said she actually had an Israeli flag in her house, and
Mhm.
um, but
Yeah.
besides for which is pretty mainstream, like the Squad, and if she's 40 years old, she's not of the millennial generation yet. that tends to favor Palestine over Israel. Um, but she did create partly an organization between Islamics and Muslims, and I was actually part of that because I remember. I mean, if there's anything else you want to say, that I could explain how my
Yes,
part,
yes, thank you. You mentioned AJC, and I'm afraid I'm in the dark as to what
the
the.
American
Uh,
Jewish Committee,
okay, okay,
which
thank you for
is
that.
a left-leaning, it's a World War II remnant organization that basically is like pro-Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, similar to the ADL. Um, they focus on fighting anti-Semitism and supporting Israel, uh, but it's a left-wing Democratic, you'll say like corporate Democrat, mainstream Democrat organization. So
Hmm.
they would be in
Hmm.
opposition to like the Squad, and she might have been a little further left than the AJC, that she supported things like Black Lives Matter, where maybe most of the people in AJCs were not, but she wasn't a huge Black Lives Matter like crusader. She had mainstream leftist but she was more a political operative in the sense like
Hmm.
there are other people that are more activists, and she was more always like a political operative uh, within the Democratic Party, although pushing for certain causes. But there's some activism where you're actually working for a specific cause, helping people on the street, and then there's other activisms where it's largely focused within the political process. So I think most of her activism focused within the political process, and it would have been more like bridge building between different communities, and then convincing them to vote for candidates. She was also part of the New American Foundation that tried to get first generation Americans to run for office, and I mean, so
Hmm. Right. What did you mean about her pushing the synagogue leftwards? What were the changes that you noticed that you were saying made you feel unwelcome? What was that? What
um,
you were saying?
well, when I came back to Metro Detroit, and I was a student at University of Michigan, I became aware of I live in the suburbs. Almost all the Jews live in the suburbs. Although the Jews had lived in Detroit uh, decades ago, like 1967 in Metro Detroit, there were race riots, a revolution, and almost all the remnants of the Jews left Detroit for the suburbs. And Detroit had a period of decline, high crime, corruption, where the mayor even went to prison for taking bribes and shady stuff. And then in the last 15 years, there started a little bit of a revival of Detroit, starting with the election of Mayor Dave Bing, who was a former basketball player. There was Dennis Archer, uh, but then you had Mayor Duggan, who was a white man from Detroit who had been on the board of directors of the hospital, and somehow got elected mayor, and got elected a second term. And you had a push for like the period of time, maybe 15 years ago, Detroit was like well over 90% black, and maybe that's only went down to like 80% black. There's been more immigration, more whites returning to the suburbs. There's a whole bunch of factors also, maybe similar in London, international trend where there was suburbanization. When Jews first came to the city, because Jews relatively are old Americans, the majority of Jews came to America before World War II. You had the German wave um, in the late 1800s, and then the Eastern European wave. You had the first Sephardic Jews that came to America, even before the founding of America. Then you have usually say there's three waves of Jewish immigration to America. The first wave is the Sephardic Jews that came from the beginning, although it was relatively very small, only like tens of thousands. And then you have the Germanic wave starting from like the 1850s through. the 1890s, where hundreds of thousands of German Jews come to America, and then in like the 1910s through 1930 till the immigration restrictions, you have the Eastern European wave, which is a huge amount, like 2 to 3 million Eastern European Jews make their way to um, America. And even after the Holocaust, like only a few 100,000 Jews came to America after the Holocaust. It's not even considered an immigration wave. But Jews start in the center of the downtowns, and slowly as the cities become more dense, different immigration waves, and the building out of the suburbs, the Jews move into the suburbs, and most of the urban areas become majority African American, or in some cities, Hispanic or different ethnic minorities. However, at a certain time, you can't go further out into the suburbs because then you're like in rural area, or you're disconnected to the economic center that is of the city. So the push to go further and further out into the suburbs stopped, and generally the most urban areas, including the suburbs now, are relatively multicultural. So like in my area, um, when my parents moved here in the 1980s, was like 90% white, 10% Jewish. And now it's like my specific neighborhood is like 90% black, but the town suburb is like 50% black, uh, in minority, and then there's other like Jews and Arabs and a few other minorities. It's probably only like 30, high 30, 40% white. And even like the nicer areas, the richest of the Jewish suburbs, they're also multicultural. They might be, if you include like Jews as white, they might be like 75% white, but there's Chinese and Indians and Arabs. And so in the last 15 years, there's been a re-urbanization of moving back to the city, and there's also been gentrification, so that urban areas that had been decayed, or um, basically left to African Americans. Sometimes, like, there's been the business center. So my mother, her whole life, drove back and forth to Detroit as a lawyer, living in the suburbs. So you have like banks, law firms, accounting, um, different economic hubs that are still based in the urban areas. However, very few people actually live there. They just commute there for work during the day. And so in the last like 20 years, you have you're familiar with gentrification?
Oh, yes, yes. So you have a rundown area being colonized by middle class people. That's how I understand it. Gentrification. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so it's your urban decay, places that had formerly maybe been urban centers that you were decayed and taken over by ethnic minorities, and then a return of people from the suburbs back into the urban areas, and a rebuilding. And it's called gentrification because usually, I mean, so the Detroit was in the 1940s, Detroit was like there was still a lot of minorities, but it was like 75% white. I mean, there were also racial riots in Detroit going back 100 years, but that if you consider Detroit was like 75+% black for 50 years, and
Mm-hmm.
so then in return to becoming more whites or other minorities returning to the urban center. And part of that includes pushing out the blacks that are currently there, um, building nicer apartments that are expensive, bringing in new type commercial things like Starbucks and yoga studios, and different things.
Mm-hmm.
And you maybe special security or police in those few areas, uh, and trying to recreate high economic, social area in just one part of the city, so that it's relatively safe. So she
Mm-hmm.
is from the wave of gentrification and also the downtown synagogue, and to relatively. So when so just with that backdrop of the later, in 2011, the synagogue is in like I think 2007, they actually the remaining people on the board of directors of the synagogue actually try to sell it. Like the rabbi passes away. This synagogue lasted in Detroit because it had a businessman mincha. I mean, are you familiar with the mincha, the daily afternoon prayer?
Um, well, thanks for reminding me.
So
Um,
you're supposed to pray 3 times a day.
three
One in the
times a
morning,
day.
you put on tefillin, and it takes like an hour. And Monday and Thursday, you take the Torah out and read a little bit from it. And then there's a nightly prayer and afternoon prayer. They're both relatively short. The night that maybe take like 15 minutes. Um, but so most Jews will do the morning prayer early. So if you're like a businessman, you might go to like a 7:30 minyan, pray for an hour, and then go to work, and then the nightly prayer. But the mincha, the daily prayer, um, especially in the winter when you have a early sundown, you have to do. If you want to do a minyan, you have to do in your place of location. So if the Orthodox Jews live in the suburbs, and quite a few hundreds of them work in Detroit by day and then come back to the suburbs at night. So the synagogue had um, a mincha, an afternoon prayer for businessmen. And
Mm-hmm.
in London, I think that's also common because and it was actually the brother of, I forget the oldest synagogue in London. I forget the name. It's actually the Rabbi Morris, who's the brother of the rabbi here in the closest synagogue to me, became the
Mm-hmm.
rabbi of like this old synagogue in London, which only has a handful of members. There's only, I think he said there's only like, he came once to this area, where his brother lives, and spoke. Um, and so it's a historic, that one in London's an historic synagogue. It's well preserved and has money. It's actually like 350 years old. I think I mentioned it 2 years ago, and even like
Where is it?
I'd have to look it up. I mean, if you want to look it up while we're talking, um, if you want to
Yeah,
say
I
some,
was just wondering in which area of.
the
I
Bevis Mark,
mean,
the Bevis
oh,
Mark synagogue.
oh, yes, that's in the city. I have visited it. It's well, it's very distinguished, very um, well.
Rabbi Shlomo
It
Morris, who's the brother
okay.
of the rabbi here in Southfield at the Young Israel. And well, I mean, it's distinguished because it's old. It's like it's one of the oldest synagogues. It's 350-year-old synagogue.
Hmm.
Um, but Jews no longer live there.
Yes, they've all
So,
moved to
like,
the
I don't know the
suburbs.
neighborhood well, but maybe there's
Hmm.
like tens of Jews. And he said like a minion, there might be a handful of old timers or younger people, but it's no longer a Jewish neighborhood. It was a Jewish neighborhood. Like, I don't know how long ago it was a Jewish neighborhood, but because it has historical importance, they preserved it nicely, and it's an important historical synagogue. Um, but it's no longer a Jewish neighborhood, so it's not like a thriving synagogue. It's just a handful of old timers or straggler Jews that still live in that neighborhood. Um,
Hmm. Yes,
and
it's in the city, as I seem to remember, the city of London.
is it a business area there, Bevis Marks?
Yes, that's what I remember when I was there, and I remember it's got a very discreet entrance, so you don't really know it's a synagogue until you're kind of there. So and I visited it on Open London Day, which is a weekend in September where buildings that are not usually open to the public are open to the public. Yes, it's one of those old-fashioned ones with women at the top in the gallery above. Yes,
Yeah, I don't know if
it's
that's a business area where so
I'm just trying to look up the
I put the
address. It would.
Wikipedia link to the Bevis Mark Synagogue and also to the Isaac Agree Synagogue in Detroit. But if the Bevis Mark Synagogue is still a place where maybe people from like Golders Green or Stamford Hill or Hemden would work in the day, then maybe they would go there for their afternoon prayer. So I don't know if it's a
Mhm,
business district like Detroit, but if like if theoretically like okay, the Jews used to live in the downtown area, and now very few Jews, most Jews live in Stamford Hill, Golders Green, Hemden or Hempton or whatever, and maybe a few other areas. But
mhm.
a lot of them might still go to work in downtown London, and
And they would pray there in the afternoon.
well, I don't know if the Bevis Mark they actually do or not, but they would
Mhm.
have to do the afternoon prayer, and some the afternoon prayer doesn't need to be done in synagogue. So often, the afternoon prayer is just done at the place of work.
Yes,
But if there's a synagogue there, they might go to the synagogue, and so the synagogue would be out of use because there's no longer a Jewish community there, but it would be sustained as basically just the use of a historical landmark that's only used for the afternoon prayer during the week, not for the main function of the Sabbath prayer, because there's no longer a Jewish community there.
yes, I think you'll be pleased at this paragraph that I'm just about to read out to you. It's actually in the City of London. So it says, today the descendants of the original Spanish and Portuguese families are few, but the services and traditions have been maintained. Bevis Marks is now a tourist attraction, welcoming visitors from far and wide at services and on weekday tours. The glowing candlelight makes it a romantic and popular choice for weddings and an atmospheric concert venue. The increasing numbers of Jews working in the City of London and its environs have afforded the opportunity for Bevis Marks to take on a new role of the Synagogue of the Square Mile.
I don't know if there's been gentrification or if it's expensive or if there's been a return that there would be Jews moving back to that area, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's different than Detroit, where it might be very expensive and it'd be unlikely that uh, you'd be dissimilar to Detroit. But so in Detroit, um, there's like 50 synagogues that used to be in Detroit. A lot of them turned into churches or different buildings. So if you do a tour of Detroit, you could point out, oh, this used to be a synagogue, and now it's a theater or a church, or you could have even got converted into residential or something else. Or a lot of them have been torn down,
Mhm.
and so at a certain point, the only one left in Detroit was the Isaac Agree Downtown Synagogue, and Isaac Agree is a name of a person. Agree like I agree with you, but that was actually his last name. And the reason it's was still in use was largely because of the businessmen using it for mincha. And they had a rabbi who was trained Orthodox, um, although he was liberal, so it was like semi-conservative synagogue, but the rabbi had Orthodox training, and he was there from like the 60s before even the 67 riots, and he passed away in the early 2000s. And maybe they had tried to maintain like a Sabbath minyan, um, but it was mostly maintained by uh, the weekday afternoon prayer service of businessmen. After the rabbi passed away, there was still like a cantor, and then like the cantor passed away, and they tried to the people on the board of directors tried to sell the building, like just get whatever profit, sell the building, pocket the money, and the court didn't allow them to do it. And so the remnants, so the board of directors kind of like, God forbid, maybe it was like a criminal. It wasn't prosecuted as criminal, but like basically they're just like, forget the synagogue, let's sell it and try to pocket the money. And the court rejected it. So the rabbi had passed away, the cantor had passed away, the board of directors had corruptly tried to sell it, and there was nothing left. There was like one old timer, um, an African American convert, like keeping the synagogue on life support. Like basically, they had no money. They didn't even have heat in the winter. They opened up the building, tried to get a minyan Saturday morning. There was a handful of people that mostly drove in, that just didn't want to see the last synagogue go, and a few old timers that drove in.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the late 2000s, um, you have the beginning of the attempt to revive Detroit in gentrification, due to this urban suburban crisis. So you had what we'll call the suburban crisis, where the economy in the suburban areas collapsing. So like me, I just graduated University of Michigan, and I want to get a job. The best place to get a job is in Detroit. But then, am I going to drive 30 minutes every day back and forth from the suburbs like most people did, like my mother did her whole life? Even she had moved further out. My mother drove 45 minutes each direction back and forth to Detroit. um, and so there was an attempt to, like, the housing crisis of 2008, of various aspects of the suburban crisis. I don't know if you remember the housing crisis in 2008.
Right. Yes.
So there's a
With
whole
the,
bunch
with the
of
bailout.
factors that caused, up till 2000 or something, it was just like, people were in the suburbs. Like no one was interested in Detroit. Like if you were a successful business person or certain fields, maybe you worked in Detroit. Like my mother was a partner at a major law firm, the accounting, governmental things. Like there are a lot of prominent Jews who worked in Detroit, but like no one really lived there. And 2008, um, a multiplicity of factors cause a return of younger people trying to make their way in Detroit. And then also an attempt of the leadership in Detroit to make Detroit more amenable to non African Americans, to make it more inviting. Um, and so 2011, I was finishing up University of Michigan, and I heard about the synagogue by like a partially Israeli, like also someone who like lived in the suburbs, and his parents were in the suburbs but had lived in Detroit, and he was trying to live in Detroit, but he was University of Michigan alumni. And I actually heard about it through the Hare Krishnas. So I had been at University of Michigan, and like I didn't have anything going on, like just the local modern Orthodox place, and that was University of Michigan. And I had been involved with the Hare Krishnas, but I was still like a Hasidic Jew. And one of the guys that was a Hare Krishna had went to an event, like an interfaith event at University of Michigan, and this younger Israeli American was like promoting reviving the downtown synagogue. So this guy who was a Hare Krishna is like, well, you got to meet Dave, and um, he connected me, and I spoke with this Israeli guy and went down to the synagogue, and it was like in shambles. Like they're like they had almost no budget. The building was in bad condition. They didn't even have money to turn on the heat regularly. Like in the winter, there was a bar next door where a lot of Jews hung out at night, and so just thought, like, what are we going to do with the synagogue? And this Israeli guy, he didn't know anything about the religion. um, he didn't know like anything about the prayer service or learning Torah. But he was a pretty, he was a musician. And uh and there were a few other people that at that point. There was like another partially Israeli guy that was a party promoter. There was another guy who was like a DJ. um there's like a ragtag group of Jews in Detroit that were, like, okay, let's try to do something here at the synagogue. There are a few, like, from Orthodox standard, questionable African American converts that had been loosely connected with the synagogue, and been going to the prayer service, and were certainly pro-Jewish, pro-synagogue. And so I was integral in recreating Friday night services. And so, like, in Detroit, the sun doesn't set in the summer till like 9, 10 o'clock. Like the
Mm-hmm.
so I was at that point, like basically completely Orthodox, and it was in the summer. So I said we got to start Friday night prayers, and I also helped institute a lunch and learn program that like once a month there would be someone that would present a topic, and like usually business leaders that like people who worked in the area, professors at Wayne State University, lawyers or that they would come up with a topic that is an intersection of their professional area of research and Judaism, and they would sponsor lunch so that you'd go once a month to the synagogue, and then eventually another Orthodox organization started another lunch and learn, and we started Friday night services, and then eventually they got a little bit of funds to people would volunteer to cook dinner. So we had a Friday night
Oh.
service and a meal afterwards, and someone would volunteer to cook dinner, and it was a different person, and um, everything was volunteer lay led. And at that point it was like completely ragtag. I think there's probably like a period of like the first year where like I probably knew more about Judaism by far than like anyone else there. Um, but over the period, so like 2012, the synagogue's already seeing a little bit of success, and other Jews are getting involved, and other Jews like so they fundraise, and one girl who I'd went to the same high school becomes director. Like someone gives a grant to be able to pay her to be the executive director of the synagogue, and then she goes through organization, and she's not interested in the religion really. She wasn't like prayer service, or she was more liberal activism. So like
Mm-hmm.
already like 2012, so there was a separate push. There was a push to create a minyan. So like for multiple years, the Friday night minyan had problems also. So like we like I used to go down um in the summers for the first few years to the Friday night minion and stay for the meal, and then try to make it home before sundown. And then later, I became more lax on my um, Sabbath observance, at least in the Orthodox standard. I would go down there, and even in the winter, and help out services, and I even led services there many times, and gave the Friday night sermon, and then there'd be a meal, and
Mm-hmm.
slowly there becomes a crew group of Jews that are living there in the area, and um, through elections they take over the synagogue. So there had been, in the beginning it was basically like, okay, there was disputes about they wanted egalitarian like minyan, and they wanted to include women in the minyan and women in participation of services, and then it became even more leftist. And so Sam Woll came there in 2012, University of Michigan alumni. Um, I think her first job was like in a dental office. So I mean, she was a
Mm-hmm.
smart woman, and she you had some sort of job like in like a dental surgery office. And she's living in Detroit, and like let's say the numbers, like so when I first went there in 2011, there was maybe like 10 Jews there. Like
Mm-hmm.
and then by like a year later, maybe there's like 40. And the synagogue, most of them only come to the synagogue rarely. And so, God forbid, they used to have what they called like a Havdalah dance party. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
you know what Havdalah is. I think I even made it on your show before.
Is it sort of Jewish dancing with single sex Jewish dancing?
Well, Havdalah is the ceremony after Sabbath where you like light the candle and smell the incense and drink wine.
Uh-huh. Oh right,
So,
I thought you meant dancing.
well, yeah. So we had this event called the Havdalah dance party, and so
Mm-hmm.
after Sabbath, like 4 times a year, we would open up the building to just a huge dance party. We'd start it with Havdalah and like, make Havdalah, do the ritual. um, there was a few people loosely connected to the synagogue, younger Jews in Detroit that were like a party promoter and a DJ. So one of these guys was a DJ, very talented DJ. Um, he had like tattoos and but he was on the Detroit scene as a DJ. And there was another guy um, related to the synagogue. He actually knew how to lead services. He went to like a conservative day school, and he actually
Did you have a video of a nightclub thing on your channel some
this party promoter is the
a
one
while
actually
back?
in my profile picture, uh,
Okay,
with the
so it's
talus on. But
okay.
he was in Detroit. He was there before I got there. He was involved in the synagogue, and he knew how to do like religious stuff. He knew how to pray, lead services. He'd went to a conservative day school, but he was like a film documentary maker in Detroit and party promoter.
Hmm.
And so 4 times a year, we would just open up the synagogue, free party, free alcohol. We would like buy a few kegs of beer and bottles of hard liquor and just a free for all party in the synagogue, and hundreds of people would come, and it would go till like the wee hours of the morning, and they were
I
really good
believe I
parties.
saw that
I
on your
even streamed
channel.
one on my YouTube channel. I have pictures on my
Yeah, I think
Facebook.
I saw that. Hmm.
But I mean, there was like if you saw that there was like a line of like 50 people waiting to get into the
Mm.
synagogue. Hundreds of people came through, and because it was free, it's in an entertainment district, so the things near the synagogue. Oh, I mean, I didn't mention. So God forbid, when I first started at the synagogue, there was a strip club right across the street from it, and
Mm.
it was like a popular strip club. Like they would have like strobe lights, valet parking. Some nights there'd be like hundreds of people at the strip club. There'd be like they had like a parking lot, and the parking lot would be full and valet parking, and they'd like rent these like strobe beam lights and put them out front. And it changed ownership like 3 times, and then eventually, I think like 2015, it finally got burnt down and like condemned. Um, but like at that time, the synagogue was a dump. The synagogue was almost always closed, and but it was an entertainment district. So right across the street was a strip club, and on other streets were like nightclubs, lounge, discos. In a lot of those places, you have to pay to get in. They have like a
Hmm.
cover charge or their bars. So when we did the Havdalah dance party, um, they were renowned as like good parties because we had good DJs, we had free alcohol, and it was just kind of interesting. A lot of people is their first only time in a synagogue, and a lot of Jews showed up. Like so, um, occasionally Jews would show up for Friday night services, or for services, and then there started being other events like organizing, liberal organization, liberal activism that would meet in the synagogue. But like relatively, most Jews didn't show up to the synagogue that often, but it was still like a central hub. And eventually, through democratic processes, two things started happening. One thing, gentrification. Uh, Stood up. So now, like where the strip club is, there's like a 10-story building. Like that building was condemned and torn down, and they built like a huge, uh, like tower where it was that has like luxury apartments. And
Hmm.
some of the buildings then that were um, like condemned, they were like unlivable status, completely empty. And so from the period of like when I first started 2011, where it was just like a junked out place. All the buildings were like condemned. You couldn't even live there. Till like 2016, there'd been a lot of money put in, and the area had become gentrified.
Hmm.
And so, by like 2016, you had maybe even over 100 Jews in the area, and they're newer Jews. Some of them had came from other places. Some of them had um, recent university graduates, a lot of them, working for non for profits, or being kind of like funded from Jewish charities. A lot of people like the medical professions. There's a few, Quicken Loans, a few major companies that employ people, and so the synagogue decides to hire a rabbi, and I was against that. Like I said, they should be lay led, and it would be divisive to hire a rabbi. That the synagogue, stay lay led, be open to everybody, and if they hire a rabbi, it's going to take a direction and become less inviting to other people. And it was also like a standalone synagogue, not with affiliation. And so they end up hiring a rabbi. So there's a woman, a reform rabbi, who had been like a rabbi at a small congregation in another town outside of Detroit called Jackson, Michigan, but she lived in Detroit. And her husband,
Mm-hmm.
like a Harvard graduate, and her husband was a professor at the law school. And she didn't really have anything to do with the synagogue. She only showed up there a few times, but she lived in the area, and I guess was whatever the case was, they end up hiring her as the rabbi. And so she's like a reform rabbi and social justice activist, but like also like a corporate Democrat type. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so not like, I mean, there's Jewish activists and then there's like corporate Democrat types. So
See.
so through elective processes, they hire a rabbi, and over like a year period of time, the synagogue completely changes. Like they get rid of the lunch and learn program. They get rid of the weekday minyan, and they start changing the nature of the service from being like, although it was egalitarian, from being like Orthodox friendly to like a more reform type service. And also, they even changed the mission statement of the synagogue. The mission statement of the synagogue used to be like to provide a minyan, a place to say Kaddish, and they changed it to like social justice. They start having like Gay Pride Month, putting a gay pride flag on the entrance to the synagogue. The activity within democratic politics and um, liberal
It,
organization,
mm-hmm.
and then they also team up with, it used to be a standalone synagogue that had no affiliation with any other Jewish organizations. And so they also team up with the Federation and other mainstream. So like the rabbi is also a member of AJC, and Sam, I guess, eventually gets on the board of directors and becomes synagogue president, and is rising in the Democratic Party. First in like local, first like as an assistant to like a state senator, knocking on doors in the Michigan Democratic Party, and then eventually to uh, Congresswoman Eliza Slotkin, and then to being like a huge Democratic operative, basically helping campaign manager for multiple Democrats. Um, the synagogue takes actual positions, like the rabbi makes statements like on abortion, like saying like, well, as a rabbi, like abortion, it's very important to keep the woman's right to choose because it's a Jewish value. God forbid, like the E. Michael Jones stuff,
Yes,
and
it made me think of him.
well, yeah. So they, I mean, they basically diminish the, certainly any Orthodox aspect or the historical, because for a long time it was Orthodox synagogue, and they move it to liberal activism, and like then all of a sudden like everybody on the board of directors in charge staff is like a woman. Like in fact now I think like there's like 5 people on staff and they're all women,
Wow.
and so Sam was part of that, and so I'll add in one last thing about Sam, because I mean, she was the one person really who knew how to do Jewish stuff. Like she was able to lead prayer services. Even the rabbi like can't really do the Jewish prayers or read from the Torah, but like Sam is able to do that. She was able to lead services, um, read from the Torah, and so probably like about
Sam
2016.
Sam was a rabbi.
She was the
That's what.
president. They hired a rabbi who was an official Reform rabbi who had went to Harvard as an undergraduate and then went to the Reform rabbinic school in Cincinnati. So Sam was not a rabbi. She was just a Jewish girl who'd went to Jewish day school,
Oh
but
right. Okay.
she knew how to lead Jewish prayers. So like the
Hmm.
Reform rabbi can't really lead prayer services or read from the Torah, even though she's a rabbi, because she's a Reform rabbi, and you're just not part of the training. It's not that important. So
Hmm.
Sam has no religious position. She just went to Jewish day school for a period, and whatever reason, she knows how to read the Torah and lead prayer service. She did it regularly. So I don't know how she knew how to do it, or who trained her how to do it. But she didn't have any like rabbinic background. She just whatever reason knew how to do it,
Hmm. Hmm.
which was quite an anomaly because I'm saying like even the rabbi doesn't know how to do it.
You can do it though, can't you? You trained as a rabbi, didn't you?
Well, I went, but I didn't grow up doing it, so I mean, I could do
Hmm.
it. I did do it many times, but like relative to people who grew up Orthodox, like like Judas Maccabeus, he'd be like making fun of my Hebrew,
Right. Right.
because like it's very hard to learn a second language, and if you didn't do it, I mean, I was bar mitzvahed reform as a kid, and like, but if you learn it in your later life, you always sound a little bit off to a native.
Yes.
So
Yes, I
this woman
understand.
Sam, I think like actually, I'm friends with her uncle too. Her uncle is a doctor in my neighborhood, and we go to the same synagogue together. So like I would always like tell Sam like, oh, I know your uncle, and her uncle is a prayer leader. He's a doctor, but he whatever reason he loves Jewish prayers. We would call him like an amateur cousin. Cousin is like the singing version of leading prayers.
Hmm.
So he's not like a big Torah scholar, but he loves leading the prayers. So when I met Sam, like I was friends with her uncle, and I was always like telling your uncle about what's happening. And so she has like her mother, I think, was Orthodox and became conservative. So she went to a conservative day school, but her mother had been Orthodox and became conservative. So,
I see.
whatever reasons Sam knew how to do it, maybe because like she had Orthodox family or went to a conservative day school or studied, or like being a Chazan prayer leader, I think was like a the grandfather or what like a lot of times it runs in the family, not necessarily because like in the genes, but I'm saying like um prayer
You
leader.
see how it's done.
Well,
You
yeah,
can
that
read
like her
Hebrew. I
grandfather
mean that.
did it, so he
Mm.
her mother knew how to do it, or when she was by her grandfather, he was probably always doing it and like teaching her prayers or like Sabbath meals. Um, they'd sit around and sing, like Jewish chants for long times. So I actually used to chant with her. She was like the only one who knew the chants also. So a lot. I mean, there were
Mhm.
people in and out, but like even the rabbi, she doesn't know the chants. She doesn't know like the Jewish songs. But like Sam knew it because like her grandfather was Orthodox, and so she
Would you
knew.
like to do a chant that she used to do in memory of her?
I don't know if she had like a chant that she used to. I mean, she used to lead the prayer service. She did the generic service. Like, I mean, she could make kiddush. She could do the Friday night songs, but I don't know if she had like a song that she like to use or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
She just did like the generic prayers. But like at the
Right.
Friday night meal, like if we did do a song, like she would always know she would like know the songs. She would know the
Hmm.
words, and she a lot of times would even have it memorized. So like if I went to a
Yes.
Friday night meal and like someone started to chant and like, oh, what are they chanting? And I'm like, okay, they're chanting this verse. And like I would even have it memorized because I lived in Orthodox culture, and like that's what Orthodox Jews do. They get together and they chant. And so
Would you like to do one for us so we can have an idea of what it's like?
um trying to think of the right mood. I'm even trying to remember. Uh, let me look at the words. I remember this was a complicated one. So this is like a Friday night song that has like a ton of words, and like it's a piet that goes back hundreds of years. Like, and a lot of Jews sing it together Friday night, and has like a nice tune, and it has
Mhm.
like a refrain, a chorus, and a refrain with like 8 verses. So I remember singing this with Sam, and she knew this song. Like like a lot of people wouldn't know, like only if you grew up Orthodox you would know the song. If you're like Reformed conservative, didn't you don't have any connection, there's almost no chance you would know the song. But like most people like in an Orthodox setting would have
Mhm.
heard this song, and um, might even have like the refrain memorized. And I remember chanting this with her. Ma yedidos minuchosek, Achabosamalka, Bilcheno roots lily crusake, Boy Shabbos nesuka, Levush big dechamidos, Lalikner. Actually, I'm messing this one up. Um, I apologize, but it's just an example of like a
Mhm.
Shabbos song. It's long. It has a lot of words. I would have to think about it because I'm a little off in my tune.
Mhm.
Lisaning betanugim, babarim uslavadogim. Lisaning betanugim, babarim uslavadogim. That's the chorus, and it actually like let us rejoice today with the fairest foods, set in array, uh, like eating fish and quail. Whatever reason, that's like the refrain, but it's a famous song, and there's a whole bunch of them. But saying like she always knew the songs, and like because she grew up because her grandfather was Orthodox, and she'd went to Jewish day schools or summer camps, and her family was also like traditionally prayer leaders.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so in 2016, I had been doing interfaith. So when I first got to the synagogue, it was like abandoned, and they had a Reconstructionist rabbi that was like helping out, working out of the synagogue, who had went to rabbinic school as an adult, a Reconstructionist, and her husband was like Israeli, and she would come down and help out at the synagogue, and she also had an interfaith network. And I had already been doing interfaith with like Muslims in New York. And so when I first got involved in the synagogue, there was this Reconstructionist rabbi, and she had a pretty good interfaith network with like Muslims, all different sorts of Muslims, from like Nation of Islam, Black, uh, to mainstream Arab Muslims, and churches, Baptist, Catholic, and they actually used to meet at the synagogue, and um, and then like once a month they would get together at a different house of worship for like an interfaith. And usually at the interfaith, like people would just present like a prayer, say something, there'd be a conversation, and a potluck meal. Lasted like 2 hours, but it lasted for like 2 years, and it was pretty nice because it was a different place of worship each month. So you'd go to the place of worship, and there'd be a potluck, and then all the different religious people would present. And I have a lot of this stuff on my YouTube page. So
Mhm.
I was doing that from 2012. 2016, after Trump gets elected, um, you have the Muslim ban. When did the Syrian refugee crisis start?
I'm afraid I don't remember exactly.
I think it was like 2016, or maybe it was even earlier under President Obama. But there was mass movements in Detroit for like Syrian refugees.
Mhm.
So I remember there was an event between a Jewish organization and Muslim organizations. It was like in iftar. Uh, but iftar is like the meal after after Ramadan,
Hmm.
after like the fast. Is that what iftar is?
I believe so. I'm a bit vague about these things, I'm afraid.
So it was an event co-hosted by Jews and Muslims, and it must have been during Ramadan. And
Hmm.
it was a meal, but the meal was like after sundown because it was an iftar meal that meant that that they'd been fasting all day and weren't eating till after sundown. And so
Yes.
I had prayed with Muslims. I've probably prayed the Muslim prayer like 50 times. I've done it a few times in New York, and then I was at University of Michigan, and then we did interfaith. So like I had actually, got down on my knees and said the Allah Akbars. I had an Ahmadiyya like prayer book. Actually, I have it here
Hmm.
on my shelf that had like an English transliteration and the directions of when to bow, what to say, and had the Arabic and English transliteration and a translation, and even had like diagrams of the Ahmadiyya
Where to
Society.
face? Oh,
The
about
what?
where to, sorry, about the diagrams about where to face Mecca? Was that what you meant, or
Well, I mean,
something
I don't
else?
think they had a diagram like where to face, but they had a diagram of like because there's different bows. Like sometimes there's like half bows or bending. You put your hands like in front of you, or you like. I think there's like
They were
four
called
half bows.
rakat or something.
There's different ways to bow. Like sometimes you do a full
Yes.
prostration, sometimes a half prostration,
Hmm.
and like there's an order of the prayer. And so it was put out by, you're familiar with the Ahmadiyya Society.
Yes. Yes.
So I got it in New York from Ahmadiyya. So like like a lot of times Muslims don't respect the Ahmadiyya, but like they have good books. So whatever
Hmm.
reason, the Ahmadiyya had like this basic Islamic prayer book that like
Hmm.
so I was able to do the Islamic prayers because I had this Ahmadiyya prayer book that I gotten in New York. And first at University of Michigan, I went like Friday to the what's it called, the Jamal or whatever, the Friday prayer, the
Uh-huh.
Jumba. Um,
Juma, I think it's called.
yeah, so like I went to University of Michigan a few times to the Friday prayer. I had and
Hmm.
I'd been to a few mosques. The few times we had interfaith at a mosque, like I participated in the prayer, and so I knew reasonably well the Islamic prayer. So at this
Hmm.
um, event for Syrian refugees, and I remember Sam was there, and before the fast they had prayer, and so I went in to pray with the Muslims, and I did the prayer with the Muslims, and
Hmm.
I told her, and she was like, I remember like she was shocked. She was like, "You're allowed to do that." And I was like, "Well, I don't know. Like, I mean, so, I told her like the rabbis or the like Maimonides, but like, I mean, like me, I also did the Hindu stuff and the Hare Krishna, but like, she was just a conservative Jew. Maybe her grandfather was Orthodox, but she was liberal minded. She was there at this event for Syrian refugees, and she, asked me like, "You're allowed to do this?" And I was like, "Well, I didn't ask anyone for permission. I just did it." But like I told her my interpretation of Jewish law, like how I could justify myself doing it, and so she joined the Islamic service also. I mean, like men and women were on different parts of it, but like I went in for the prayer, and I remember, like she stopped me and she's like, it was like, "What are you allowed to do this?" And I was like, I quickly told her, I was like, well, some rabbis give an exemption for doing it, and so she joined for the Islamic prayer. And I think that was the first time she ever did it, and like I remember she was like uh hesitant, like she just as a Jew, like Claire or something like me doing the Hare Krishna stuff. Like she like even though she was an Orthodox Jew, she had this feeling like you can't do that. That's forbidden. Or like like you're a Jew and you're allowed to do the Islamic prayer, and whatever reason, like at that point at the synagogue, I probably knew more about Judaism than anybody else, and so she probably didn't have anyone else to ask, and then she saw like I was doing it, and um, so she also participated in the Islamic prayer, and
Oh.
um, but the
Can
like
you recite the prayers? You say you have the book. Can you do it again? What you're saying? You both recited the prayers in
well, I don't know. She
Arabic.
probably
You
didn't say the
and
prayers,
Sam.
like, and I don't know all the. I mean, like, I'm saying if you just like Allahu Akbar, like 10% of the prayers because they like repeat like Allahu Akbar like 20 times.
Oh, right, right.
And it's saying
It's
like, oh, I mean, if they open up the Bismillah Makrim or whatever, but I had a prayer book. I'm not sure if
mhm,
that event I had the prayer book, so I might have just like stood with them or kneeled when they kneeled, or like when
mhm,
everyone said Allahu Akbar, I said Allahu Akbar, but I didn't
mhm,
actually say all the prayers. I didn't know all the prayers.
mhm.
Um, but like some of them actually like brought the prayer book, and like I explained to them, like oh, I got this prayer book, and so they were like, oh, cool, that's neat, and encouraged me to uh, to participate, and
Mhm.
in so I mean, almost all the Muslims have that memorized. I mean, like in University of Michigan, a lot of people from like become like born again Muslims in university or different periods, but like I think like if you grew up Muslim, you've done the prayer a handful of times, like you just have that memorized, right?
Mhm.
Because like I've done that like 50 times, and like I've never seen anybody other than me with a prayer book there.
Yeah, I suppose it must be a bit like the Lord's Prayer. You somehow absorb it, you know,
And there's a lot. I mean,
as I have, just
a
because
lot
I've
of
heard
it's
it so often.
repetitive. So I think
Mm.
there's like 4 rounds, and like um, it depends on the like. There's the night prayer. There's 5 different prayers, and some of them are shorter than others. But there could be like 2 or 4 rounds of the prayers where like you kneel, and like most of them, like a lot of the prayers are repeated each round, and then there might be a few other prayers. And if there's a prayer leader, they add in verses from the Quran, um, but by heart. Like so, saying I've never been to a prayer service where like anyone was using a prayer book. So like most synagogues, even people who know the prayers like many times, like everyone uses a prayer book. So like Sam probably had large parts of the prayers memorized, but like I mean, just thinking about that now, like because like in synagogue, even Orthodox, ultra Orthodox synagogues, like everyone uses a prayer book, but like I've never seen people using a prayer book at a mosque.
Yeah.
But I think because it's mostly repetitive, or they have a high value on memorization. So I mean, it's not like I don't know how many words, 2 to 500 words that maybe have to be memorized, and a lot of it's repetitive. But whatever the case is, like she probably just bowed when everyone else bowed, or said Allahu
It's,
Akbar, like saying because if you don't know the prayers, you could just and there's like amens. So like in the
yes.
Islamic prayer, there's like like um there's probably like 10 Allahu Akbars, and there's like multiple amens. Like Amin, is that how they say? Like Amin, how do they
Yes,
pronounce
they say Amen, which is Amen, I guess, the Islamic version of Amen, right? Amen, or however you call it.
So I didn't necessarily encourage her to do it, but like she was there, and she saw I was the only Jew who was going to pray with them, and this event was like way more Muslims than Jews because it was for Syrian refugees, and maybe like 20 Jews showed up, and there was like 100 Muslims there, and she saw like I was the only Jew who was praying with them, and just a second before she asked me like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm going to pray with them." He's like, "You're allowed to do that," and like I quickly said,
Hmm.
"Well, like a lot of rabbis say you can't, but there are some rabbis that give an exception," and I mentioned like Maimonides, that Maimonides said uh, you could pray with Muslims. I mean, he didn't necessarily encourage, but Maimonides said it wasn't forbidden to do the Islamic prayer.
Yes, I was mentioning recently that this that Jews are allowed to pray with Muslims in mosques, but are forbidden to enter churches.
Well, I'm saying to
It,
actually, well, I'd say something else to actually do the Islamic prayer. So not just you could
Oh.
go into a mosque, you could say your own prayers, but that you could participate in the Islamic prayer service.
Hmm. Hmm. And
So,
that was what Maimonides said.
well, I, I think he said that. Like, so it was just a very quick conversation, and so like you like within a minute, the conversation was over and the prayer started, and she participated in the Islamic prayers also. And like I don't
Hmm.
know if you're allowed. Like I'm not an expert in Jewish law, but like I've done it like 50 times. I know other Jews who do like they're like most, it's like the Hare Krishna, although it's less bad than the Hare Krishna, but like most Jews would be like, what the hell? Like you can't do that. And like even her who was like at most like a conservative Jew and at that point, living in Detroit, like her she still was like, what the hell are you doing? Like you're not allowed to pray with the Muslims. And but she ended up joining and praying with the Muslims also. And
Yes,
like I know like definitely well because she went on, she created a Jewish Islamic organization in Detroit and got involved
uh,
in interfaith. Like I know like very clearly that was the first time she did it, and like she asked me about it because she like I mean I don't know exactly remember exactly, but she was like what are you doing? And I was like, I'm going to pray. I'm going to do the prayer with them. And then she asked me like, you're allowed to do that? I mean, she knew me from synagogue. Like we had already been to synagogue tens of times. She knew, like I wore yarmulke and tzitzis and, like I knew the Hebrew prayers and, like a lot of stuff, like more than anybody else at the synagogue at the time. So she was like shocked. She was like, she's like, what are you doing? And there's like, you sure you're allowed to do this? And, I think I said straight up like, well, like a lot of rabbis would recommend against it or say it's forbidden, but some rabbis allow it. And I mentioned Maimonides, I think, like, so just in like a
mhm.
minute conversation, then the prayers started. And, like I went into the prayers with on the men's side, and there were women there also. And, I'm not sure if she was part of the AJC then. So she probably joined the AJC later, but, part of the AJC is interfaith networks and political activism. And so she became involved in interfaith and also, going to other places, houses of worship. But she was more like a political operative. So there was like straight, like bring in Democratic candidates, vote for this candidate, or, like more like political activism. I did interfaith. It was more like pure interfaith.
Mhm,
Like we
mhm.
talked scripture and theology and belief system, and there was no politics. Um, so like when she did it, it was like probably like 75 to 90% politics.
Right.
But she did, but she did it through the Jewish organizations, and um, eventually, I mean, she might have even been like a senior leader in the AJC, and she became on the board of directors of like countless organizations. She was also on the board of directors of a lot of um, leftist activist organization, refugee,
Mhm.
immigrant charity. Um, but like I would have never thought of like making an organization between like Jews and Muslims. In fact, like it's not my thing. I never once. I showed up to a few of the events, but like I don't like political stuff. Like I went to a mosque a few times. Most of the times I went purely on my own, and like I've never went as a representative of a Jewish organization. Like
Mhm.
there's been a few times like I went because there were Jews there, but I never went as a representative of a Jewish organization, and I was more like straight like theology, interfaith. Um, she was more like political organization, which
So she was reaching out to potential Democrat supporters in the Muslim community. That was
yeah, I
her
mean, from the
objective.
Orthodox perspective, like no one would do what she would do. Like that's like
Hmm.
even like okay, very few people would do what I do, but say if you're going to do it, you're not doing it in a political fashion. You're doing it like um in some theological or belief or some um so like I'm not an organizational person. I'm not a
Hmm.
political person.
Hmm.
So she was more organizational and political.
Yes.
But like
Yes.
I do think that um I mean she probably would have been involved with Muslims also, but like I do remember that that time very clearly where she asked me about doing the Muslim prayer service and being like shocked that I was praying with the Muslims.
Mm. Mm.
But even if you look in a lot of the news articles that say that she was people like because people like, oh, it's anti-Semitism, like it could have been an anti-Semitic attack, and say like, well, no, she was the head of an organization between Muslims and Jews, and a lot of it was kind of like the the um, coalition of minorities, so under the Democratic Party, so like immigration or Democratic candidates or various issues. So when Jewish organizations do these things, it's usually about the coalition of minorities against the whites. So to say, although it's
Mm.
not necessarily anti-white in spirit, but like like it's de facto anti-white because it's the coalition of minorities usually against the Republican Party. And
Yes.
and at that point, I was politically neutral. However, I was pro-immigration and multiculturalism, so I was right-leaning, but I supported Syrian refugees, and I opposed the Muslim ban. But like politically, I was still right-leaning and politically neutral. Just on that issue, I felt compelled to be pro-refugee or pro-immigrant. And there was also like deportations where after Trump for a period, they were actually deporting people here in Metro Detroit. Um, but she and I actually went to some of the events. Like so, she created this Islamic Jewish coalition. And I even went to some of the events and over the years. And but she followed the mainstream path of non-Orthodox Jews. It's like among Orthodox Jews, like people don't really like join organizations or form organizations. Like people just like it's less formal. And so among liberal Jews, it's more organizational. And so like if you're a prominent Jew among Orthodox Jews, it's an unofficial leadership position. And that would be because Orthodox Jews gather constantly. Like Orthodox Jews come to synagogue 3 times a day. A lot of them spend even more than that hours studying in synagogue, and life is organized within the synagogue. So the bureaucratic leadership position is, if they have one, is usually not like the prominent leaders of the community. And the prominent leaders of the community, um, it's obvious to the people, like they could be wealthy people, they could have people in their house, or they could be like so to say um the center of attention. When you go into the synagogue and there's one guy talking and there's crowds among him, and or even people that are liaisons to the non-Jewish leaders. um Usually they're not official there because the Orthodox Jews, they're always gathered around together, as opposed to liberal Jews who only get together rarely. And when they get together, it's usually like called together under certain organizational functions. So in the liberal Jewish community, the path for the people who are involved is to get on board of directors, make events, and usually when people are brought together in the larger Jewish community, it's political in nature, usually connected to democratic politics. So she became like a big Jew in the mainstream um, method of leftist Jews. You eventually becoming synagogue president, on the board of directors of multiple organizations, one of the most senior ranking people in the Democratic Party in Michigan, even among non-Jews. And so the events would largely be like political in nature, be political candidates, or if it was interfaith, bringing different communities together, and it would be like official. They would be like official. as we're in the Orthodox community, events are much more unofficial, and it's less like there wouldn't be like an event saying like, so in the liberal community you might only get together a few times a year, and it'd be like, there'd have to be something special that people are going to come to for this event, as where in the Orthodox community basically everyone gets together multiple times a day already anyways. So it was a different nature that but she was like, I remember when she first came to the synagogue, University of Michigan alumni, and she rose through the ranks to be one of the most prominent members. So her death was shocking, and she was probably like I mean, God forbid she was 40 and single, no children, or at least we think she was single. Maybe she wasn't single. If it turns out, God forbid, if we find out who did it or how it happened, maybe she wasn't single, but like relatively, she was 40 and unmarried without children, but she had risen to be within organizational Judaism, maybe even the single most prominent Jew in Metro Detroit. So like that's why her death is getting international media attention. It's shocking. She was well liked. She was always nice. Um, she was she went to this elite. She went to one of the most elite high schools in Michigan called Cranbrook,
Hmm.
which is non-Jewish, but it's like where Mitt Romney went to school. It had been Christian decades ago, but now it's basically secular. But it's it has its whole like campus. It's like a boarding school for wealthy people. Some of the wealthiest people in the state go there. They have a huge like art academy, buildings, and planetarium, um, a science museum, dinosaur skeletons. So she had went to this like elite high school. She was good test scores, University of Michigan alumni, and she followed the basic leftist path of Jewish leadership to um, she could have even became like head of the federation in Metro Detroit. I mean, usually the head of federation is already like a more older senior person, like their 60s. Even the last woman was like 90 years old, but like so the head of the federation often is in their 60s or even 70s. But she could have even went on to become like the whole head of the Jewish Federation in Metro Detroit. She was on that path. Um, Eliza Slotkin, who I think might be running for senator. So, like she was a congressional staffer, campaign manager for Eliza Slotkin, who was a Jewish woman who is a congresswoman, and she's going to be running for senator in 2024. So Sam Woll would have almost definitely been her campaign manager for the senator run. She probably would have been involved in campaign finance, raising large sums of money. Um, and so like just this possibility that it was an anti-Semitic attack. They basically, I mean, there's a lot of millionaires. There's a lot of people like you know Jews that are not involved in Jewish organizational life. Um, like business leaders or stuff like that. But in terms of organized Judaism, like she's probably the most prominent Jew in Detroit. So like that's why her murder was such shocking and international news, and especially now the time where people are still suspect that it was, even though the police are saying they don't think it was anti-Semitic at all, and maybe it's going to come out where it's even someone who knew her, or it could be politically motivated because it said she was a senior Democratic official. But
Hmm.
that's why it's such a big deal because she was you probably have said the most senior ranking Jewish activist in Detroit.
Hmm. So it could be political or personal, but probably not an anti-Semitic attack.
Yeah, and even said like, okay, she moved past me in the sense like, I remember when she first came to Detroit and we were involved in events and prayed together, and she was always nice to me. Like if I had seen her, she would probably still be nice to me. But like she moved past me, so like if I went back to the synagogue after the takeover, I would have just been like some guy sitting on the sidelines. They would have been like the feminist takeover. and there'd be like all women in charge, and
Mm.
like either like it would just be like, okay, we're in charge now, you sit silently on the side and watch us lead things, or they like want me, or they God forbid they probably kick me out because
Well, it could be an angry Jewish man who didn't like his synagogue being taken over by women, perhaps.
well, God forbid, but yeah, I mean, to come
Mm.
to like murder and stabbing someone to death, that'd be, although, I mean, God forbid if it is someone who knew her, the possibility that it was a Jew who did it is very possible. If it was like a boyfriend, I mean, because she's head of the synagogue, leader in Jewish organization, so it's very likely if she had a boyfriend or a romantic interest that they were Jewish, or so I mean, God forbid it could turn out that it was a Jew who killed her. I would even put at this point, since the police are saying it's not anti-Semitic, that it could even be likely that it was a Jew who did it. God forbid.
Hmm.
But I mean, we don't have any information yet. We just wait on that. But whatever reason, the police said that they, like almost no chance it was anti-Semitic or a hate crime, and it happened inside of her apartment, and most likely someone who knew her.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Did you hear of men complaining about the female takeover of their synagogue? Or, or
well,
have
yeah,
you lost
and
touch?
like yeah, I mean, definitely like I mean, because there were so few people involved. So like Deshaun, like who streamed, my African American friend who I used to stream with
Hmm.
a few times. I don't know if you remember him.
I vaguely.
I did like, I think I have 7 streams on the playlist of him in my house. And so
Hmm.
he was at the synagogue before. He was in Detroit like from the 90s. So he had been, so he had been involved with the synagogue. Um, okay, he was African American and maybe like half Jewish from his mother, or a convert, but he'd went to Jewish schools as a kid, and he had been involved in Judaism in Detroit and with the synagogue from like the mid 90s. So like I got there in 2011, and he was like from the handful of people there, and he knew everything that was going on. And yeah, I mean, like me and him used to complain about the turn left and the feminist takeover, in the sense, in like the the gay flag, or stuff like that. And like he lived in Detroit, he didn't have any choice. But yeah, I mean, like the take, like the I mean, so like God forbid, like when they had the new rabbi, like then then all of a sudden they had like Gay Pride Month, and like the gay flag would be hanging up like even like all year, and um the feminist agenda, it was like yeah, definitely like, but to some extent, like there's not much of a congregation, like in terms of prayer, going there for Jewish things, people who want to do the prayers, people who want to study Torah. It's small demand. So when I had went there, I had wanted to help revive Judaism by creating a minyan, teaching people the Hebrew. In fact, my YouTube channel I created originally to teach people the Hebrew prayers and to like learn Torah. And along with the original mission of the synagogue, was a place for prayers and people to say Kaddish, and like to have Torah learning. But there really wasn't any demand because it was Detroit. There was only a handful of Jews, and there's like no Orthodox Jews in Detroit. Like at most you have a few Orthodox business people that work in Detroit during the day, and then go to the suburbs. And most of the Jews who live in Detroit are unaffiliated or very left wing leaning. So um when they turned the synagogue into like basically a home for liberal activism and Democratic Party politics stuff, uh there was almost no pushback. So like there's
Hmm.
not really like there's no right wing Jews in Detroit. There's no Orthodox Jews in Detroit. Like because like we were talking about, the Jewish community had already long abandoned that area, and the only Jews that were in that area were like newer ones who had moved back in the last few years. And there's almost no chance a person with right wing leanings would, like a Jew with right wing leanings, would go to Detroit.
Right. Because
So,
there was just no presence. So it could be some political rival of her.
well, it's just pure speculation. I mean, because she was a prominent person in politics, it could have been a political assassination. Although the police made it sound like it was probably someone she knew, like one of her possible like friends or associates. So it's like, God forbid, we don't know any information yet, but that's the police, without releasing the details, said that that was um, their suspicion now. Although it's also possible it would have been um, some form of like targeted political assassination, maybe not connected to Judaism, like abortion related or something that. But you, God forbid, the police made it sound like it's most likely a crime of passion, especially like a stabbing with a knife. Because like I
Yes.
mentioned on Luke 4, like in Detroit, everyone has guns, and like even like young kids. Like, I mean, besides for legal guns, as long as you don't have a criminal record, um, you could just buy a gun. Um, I don't know if she was a gun owner, but like it wouldn't even surprise me if she was a gun owner, because like Detroit's a dangerous place, and most people are gonna opt to keep themselves safe through gun ownership. And like most of the deaths, like Detroit has one of the highest murder rates in America, or even the whole world, and like 90+% of those deaths are gun deaths, and they're also mostly black on black crime. And that if someone was going to do a home invasion, um, they would almost certainly use a gun. And if someone was going to do some sort of like targeted political assassination, they would almost certainly use a gun. And so, just the nature of it being a stabbing leans towards a crime of passion. And even my mom told me that most stabbings happen
In the
by
kitchen.
they happen by
Or
some.
most fights start in the kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, if it was someone she knew that had an argument that escalated to her her friend or her uh, love interest would have stabbed her. God forbid. So I mean,
Yes.
unfortunately, I mean, at this point, like I know people would even say they want to see it be anti-Semitic, and like some Palestinian activist would have done it as a hate crime or in revenge for what's happening in Israel, as opposed to, God forbid, more likely that it was her, possibly someone she's dating that, whatever reason, went crazy and stabbed her.
Yes, I mean, the first paragraph of the Jewish Chronicle says the president of a Detroit synagogue board has been stabbed to death outside her home.
Her body was found outside, but so that if you look at it, say they found her unresponsive in the street, and then the police came, but there was uh, a blood trail leading back to her apartment, and
I
then
see.
they didn't release all the information because they haven't arrested a suspect, and the investigation's still open. But it made it seem clear from today's press conference that she was clearly stabbed inside her house, and then whatever reason, which they're unclear of now, is that she left her house. Maybe she was going after the person who stabbed her, or maybe she was seeking help, that she went outside. But God forbid, from I mean, I don't know if they'll ever release like crime scene photos, or like blood splatter or whatever. I don't know if they have the knife. Like, God
Mhm.
forbid if the knife is in evidence or not. I mean, they didn't release that much information because they said the investigation is still open. It made it sound like they even have a primary suspect, like that they think they might know who did it and have been questioning them, although there might be a lack of evidence. Meaning to say, they if it was a crime of passion and she had a boyfriend or something like that, and they think it's her boyfriend who did it, but he hasn't admitted he's done it, and there's no evidence, there's no knife or something like that. Um, that could be the current situation, although the police, whatever reason, made it vague. That and it could be things could turn out like otherwise too. That whatever reason, the but I don't know your suspicion just on if she was killed inside her townhouse through stabbing, that's substantially more likely it was someone she knew, and maybe even that she uh, and they said there's no evidence of struggle, no evidence of injury, like she had fought back or in any sense, and no evidence of a break-in. So it was leaning
And
towards.
he would have been covered in he. I assume it's a he. Maybe we're being a bit sexist here, but I mean there'd be DNA all over the person who multiply who stabbed her multiple times.
Well, it could
Uh,
be a. I mean, God forbid if it was like if she did have like a roommate or someone that was there, and the police even know it that like this person was there and they're the most likely person who did it. However, there's no murder weapon, there's no direct evidence besides for and even like not a motive, like saying that if she did have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever, and the only it points towards them being the the person who did it, God forbid. But if they disposed of the weapon and there's no direct evidence, it could be hard to prosecute.
mhm.
So, like the police said they haven't made an arrest, but they made it sound like they have a prime suspect.
Yes.
And so it could be the scenario right now where the police questioning are saying they have to come up with some sort of conclusive evidence to because if the person took the knife and threw it in the Detroit River, and it could be hard to prove,
Yes.
even if it was like I mean, like God forbid if she, say she did have a roommate or something, or someone there, even if it's like the police are almost convinced it has to be this person who did it. But said like if they took the knife with them and threw it in the river, um, it could be quite difficult to actually prove, and then even to get like a grand jury indictment to bring the case. So that's what they said doing the investigation, and they're still looking for um, cameras. I guess she had been at a wedding and she left about 12:30 to walk home, and she was found. She was reported to the police like God forbid she was like lying outside, and the police found her body about 6:30 in the morning. So if there's more details about when they think the crime happened or forensic evidence, um, God forbid that she got home after 12:30, uh, she came by herself, if someone followed her, if it was like an assassination where someone followed her and somehow snuck into her apartment while she was coming in, or if it's someone she knew and openly invited into her apartment, and however it was one of her friends or some relation she had that did it. So
Hmm.
but the I mean, so if the press conference that happened earlier, there's a whole bunch of questions like, well, how can you rule out anti-Semitism, and how can you rule out like a hate crime? And at the same time, they were saying like they even asked her, "Are you saying it was someone who knew her?" And so they didn't conclusively say it was someone who knew her, and they're looking for like street cameras, camera evidence, any witnesses to come forward, and they're interviewing people who knew her. So,
Yes, I mean it sounds like it could have been somebody she met at the wedding.
well, well, I mean, saying no. I mean, if it's someone she just met, I mean, then they would have had to follow her home and get into her apartment. And if she had to, either have led him into her apartment or somehow followed her and like forced their way into the apartment, and then also the issue like a stabbing, like saying if it was some form of stabbing, usually is going to imply like a moment of passion
Hmm.
at the moment. I mean, so it wasn't premeditated. Like if it was someone's going to premeditate it, um, very unlikely they would use a knife.
Yes, well, apparently she returned home around 12:30 a.m., but was found dead at roughly 6:30 a.m.
But I
outside
mean,
her
yeah, the
home.
police have conclusively said that she was killed in her apartment. I mean, that she was stabbed in the apartment and then, for whatever reason, walked to the street where eventually she passed out and was found. But that the stabbing occurred in the apartment, and I assume they have forensic evidence that they said, clearly of the blood or in the
Hmm.
apartment that, and they said the blood trail. There was a blood trail from her body to her apartment, and then presumably there's the forensic evidence of the blood in the apartment that shows that's where it happened. And they didn't mention, like, details of whether they have the knife or you know
Mm-hmm.
any DNA evidence that there'd be someone else there, or that they would search for to demonstrate that. So if it turns to God forbid. So I mean, I don't know if you think it would be a national story if, I mean, God forbid, if if she had like a boyfriend or girlfriend, it turns out she was killed by her boyfriend or girlfriend, and it was known at the time. Do you think it still would have been an international story, or it's because the speculation that it's anti-Semitic that it's an international story that if God forbid, uh,
Or maybe they don't care, that they kind of want, people to, fill in the blanks, and they have this story for people to talk about and, want to know more about
I saw
later.
that even to the press briefing today, the uh, White House, like in the one of the reporters asked if the president had been briefed on it, and the press secretary said yes, the president was briefed on her killing.
Well,
And
I think it's because she's pretty, right? I mean, she's
no, I mean it's
obviously
because they're worried that
attractive.
uh, due to the war in Israel, that random Jews are going to be killed. So I mean that's why the news story is, God forbid, you just the worry that maybe because of the war in Israel, like that Muslim kid in Chicago, that some crazy Palestinian or Muslim or Arab just decide to kill a Jew, and that the whole Jewish community is going to be paranoid that maybe I'm next. Maybe I'm going to go to the gas station, and some Palestinian activist is just going to decide to kill me. So I mean, I think that's why the stories just like if they knew that she was killed by something completely unrelated to Judaism, just a crime of passion, God forbid, even though she was a wonderful person, it would not be as big of a story. But I'm saying the reason it's a story is because the war in Israel and the possibility that it was some form of anti-Semitism and um,
Yeah, I guess people knew that others were going to jump to conclusions about it, and plus she was an attractive woman with a nice smile, and there's all this stuff that I think
yeah, I mean, she's a
that
prominent
has all
woman
the
also.
elements of a
I mean,
good
so she would
story.
have been chief of staff of the senatorial candidate of the Democrats, and Dana Nessel. So I mean, even if yeah, I mean, it'd be a big story in any case, but I don't think it would be as big of a story if uh, if it wasn't related to the war and the possibility that it was a targeted anti-Semitic hate crime. And then even to list like um, she happens like if you consider that she's president of a synagogue, um, that's probably not her main accomplishment. So if you listed congressional staffer, and even that like so you put like, oh, president of synagogue, you're saying a Jew was killed. Maybe they were killed because she was Jewish, God forbid,
Mhm.
as opposed to the story being congressional staffer killed. and
Yes.
and then not even mentioning, you could mention, okay, she happened to also have a long resume and was part of Jewish organization, but just the way the media frames it, um, and then also the implications. So if the news story was carried congressional staffer killed, then okay, what happened? Could have been a crime of passion, nothing to do with her being a congressional staffer, but the implication would be that it was related to politics. But when they
Yes.
carry it president, synagogue president, the implication is related to Judaism. So it's a purposeful media spin that might be inaccurate. And then even to say what would make her more likely to be killed for no reason, being a congressional staffer or being the president of a synagogue. And even like,
Hmm.
okay, like if I got killed, God forbid, um, would it be Doovid, like a Jew was killed, or be like unlikable internet troll killed. And so like no one would think it was anti-Semitism. You just think like this unlikable internet troll was killed, so it could have been like any one of countless people that just didn't like this unlikable internet troll, and no one would even think it was anti-Semitism. But saying if like God forbid, like if it was me who was dead, who was killed like that, how would the news report it? And I'm not like officially part of anything, so just like random. But if I like if I had
Oh, to
like
write to rabbi. Yes.
well, they could like amateur rabbi, Jewish blogger, Jewish streamer, Jewish activist. So like Jewish activist Doovid was stabbed in Metro Detroit, God forbid, and be international news because I was probably would have been killed because someone anti-Semitism, that someone just didn't like Jews so much that they wanted to demonstrate their hatred of Jews by taking me out. But like say like no, I mean, they'd probably be like internet troll that nobody liked anyways, got killed, like due to the long list of people that were tired of his pathetic antics.
Yes, framing is very important. Doubtless there will be further developments and you will know a bit more before too long. And perhaps you will come back and tell us more.
Yeah, and I mean I think it's going to be a in terms of what happens will be. I mean it might be just drama interesting in terms of if it was a crime of passion, of why or how it happened. Um, but into one thing, like it's not surprising. So most people are looking at it and say, like, yeah, I could see that she got killed because she was Jewish. I could see the war in Israel. They just killed 1,200 people. The way they're framing the war, like in Hamas. So I could see, like, yeah, some crazy Palestinian that hates Jews and is against the war just decided to kill some random Jew, or even purposely some prominent Jew, even though she was somewhat of a leftist liberal activist. Um, so I mean, even if you follow like the news, like even the police, like so the police were. I was like on Facebook, the like half of the comments on the like the Facebook feed was like, "Come on, like this was anti-Semitic, like don't give us this BS." And then even like Rashida Tlaib, she was friends with Rashida Tlaib, because Democratic politics, like Rashida Tlaib, like posted like a morning, my friend Samantha Woll was killed and it was horrible. But like if you look online, like 1 out of 10 people are basically blaming it on Rashida Tlaib. And so if you say like, oh, some Rashida Tlaib was talking about genocide in Gaza, and some crazy person heard that and decided to kill her, and so that and then I think that's the speculation and the fear, as opposed to God. I mean, I say her death is tragic no matter how it happened, even if it. I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about her in like a scenario, but even if you could have said like it was a crime of passion where she had like two different boyfriends and was cheating on one boyfriend, and the other jealous boyfriend killed her or something like that, God forbid. And I don't mean to bespeak her memory at all. I have no reason to think that's what happened, but I'm saying if something like that happened, where it'd still
Hypothetically.
be horribly tragic, like there's no reason
Mm,
that should have happened, and her jealous boyfriend should be punished to the full extent. It would be a completely different demeanor than like, oh, it's because Rashida Tlaib is making incendiary comments on Twitter and inciting anti-Semitism.
mm. I mean, it does sound like it was somebody she must have met at the wedding. We don't know if it was a Jewish wedding or a Gentile wedding.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I haven't seen her for 3 years, and I don't even know if she
mm,
had boyfriends or something
mhm.
like that. But I mean, it's the type crime that you might expect from like a jealous boyfriend,
Yes,
as
yes,
opposed
indeed.
to like a anti-Semitic attack, hate crime,
Mm. But
which
I suppose I mean because she was at the wedding and there were people at the wedding, then that there would be much speculation. I suppose that
well, no, I mean, all the
the
speculation
killer
as of
might have
now
been at the
is
wedding.
anti-Semitism. I
Mm.
mean, so if they interview enough people who know her, or like it comes out like no, she had a jealous boyfriend, and we all think it's him, and like we haven't found the knife, and but the police think it's him, and her close, confident friends who know her think it was her jealous boyfriend. Like, so that hasn't came out. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I just made that up. I don't even know if she had a boyfriend or, to even say, but, the police were making it sound like that's way more likely than anti-Semitism. Although I gotta say, like, the media was definitely questioning the police, and the police didn't release. They said they couldn't release more information due to the investigation. Um, so there still could be, like the pressure saying like, no, we still think it was an anti-Semitic hate crime, and whatever reason, why are the police trying to cover it? But I mean, she also like she didn't live in an Arab area. She lived among
Mm-hmm.
blacks, and
Oh.
but I say also like most most black crime in Detroit is guns,
Mm-hmm.
and so like what and it seems like a crime of passion, like someone she knew or she didn't fight back, and just saying that if it was, I mean, it still could turn out with someone black who did it, but it would also probably be someone she knew or had allowed to come into her apartment. And if to say like if it wasn't premeditated, like if
Mm-hmm.
they had an argument and then God forbid whether, I mean, the police haven't released any of this information whether they used one of her knives or, I mean, because like what kind of person carries around a knife? So if they were carrying around the knife, it was probably premeditated, as opposed to if they used like one of the knives in her apartment, they were in the apartment already, and then used one of her knives. Because I can't imagine like what kind of person carries around a knife, and if you were a violent person in Detroit, like because everyone has guns, a knife's not a very good weapon, and if so if you were a violent person in Detroit, like almost certainly you'd be carrying a gun, not a knife. If it was premeditated, in this sense, like God forbid, just like why would someone choose a knife? But that the police haven't released enough information, and
Mm-hmm.
and really, like God forbid, she was a wonderful person. She was well liked, and to dig into those details of her life is painful for the people who knew her, and just the shock that she's dead, she's lost, to trying to figure out who did it, why they
Yes.
do it, how'd they do it, and saying like,
Yes.
well, like all these, but because it's an international news story, everybody's like an internet sleuth, and they're saying like, well, like maybe I could figure it out from the power of my computer, from my computer looking into the details, maybe I could figure it out.
Yes. I was thinking, well, does she has a face? Does she have a Facebook account?
Now I'm friends
And
with her on Facebook, I mean, like, but she doesn't do many posts, and she has like
mhm.
thousands of friends, and then you see like if you just search her name on Facebook, like hundreds of people have posted pictures with her. Like Sam was my friend, and they have pictures. Like I could probably find a picture. I saw a few. Like I mean, there are a few pictures where me and her in the same picture. But I mean, you're just gonna look through like the thousands of people that she's in pictures with. Um,
Mhm.
it'd be a. But I mean, the police probably have information. Like so, it said if she had regularly had people at her apartment or she had a boyfriend. I mean, I would say like God forbid, if she had a boyfriend, the prime suspect is probably her boyfriend.
Yes.
If she had a roommate, the prime suspect is probably her roommate, or like
Mhm.
if she had like a transient people that had the key, or something like that. Like if they've ruled out anti-Semitism, hate crime, and a robbery, they said there's no evidence of forced entry, nothing was taken, it wasn't a robbery. That means the prime suspects are um, her closest friends, or the people who knew her best, the people that like I mean, you know what I'm saying? Something like God forbid, like if you were like okay, I mean, if you're a God forbid, like a old widow or something, but like if you're a family person and they look into it, they rule out robbery, they rule out everything else. They say like, no, my God forbid, it was probably his wife, it was probably one of
Mhm.
his kids, and that's how the investigations takes the turn by ruling out possibilities, and that's what the police said at the press conference today, where they basically ruled out robbery, they ruled out hate crime, and they're looking at interviewing people that knew her. You're saying that it was probably someone who knew her pretty that even had access, or that she would have allowed into her apartment.
She has even got a Twitter account, which I find surprising for somebody who's so high up in politics. But she doesn't seem to have a Twitter account, does she?
She's not. She's more organizer. She's not like a public personality. She used to do the training for door knocking.
Oh,
So she
yes.
wasn't necessarily like so when you entered the democratic politics, like in campaigning. So she did training for campaigning, and so she would train people to knock on doors. So like back in Hillary Clinton, like there would even be like hundreds of people because like when Hillary Clinton was running, there'd be hundreds of volunteers that have signed up, and she would give like a seminar and teaching to sometimes like 50 100 people on how to knock on doors to
Mm-hmm.
convince people, and smaller candidates. And so she was more a political operative insider than like I don't know if she'd ever been interviewed on the news, and I don't even know if she'd ever been in the paper before. So she was more
Mm-hmm.
insider, uh strategist, organizer. She was chief of staff. But like I said,
Mm-hmm.
like so she may not have been prominent in that sense where she was tweeting, and even on Facebook, she has like 2,600 friends, but she hardly makes any posts. So I don't know exactly like so you say like I never met her. I think I walked her and I know actually like I was in her apartment once, but I was
Oh,
never
you've been to her
no,
apartment.
not her old apartment. Not the apartment she
Okay.
was. I was saying like 10 years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
that was actually at her sister's after her sister's wedding in one of the meals, and so I met her parents there, but like I'd never been one on one with her. Like I like I definitely like was at events with her 100 times in like the synagogue, but like I was never in a place where it was just me and her. It was always at events. There are a few times like after an event we talked outside of the synagogue before going our separate ways. Like we both left the synagogue and we talked outside for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even a few times.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always events with a whole bunch of people. And so
Mm-hmm.
even though I was probably at the synagogue with her 100 times, and I was at another 20 events outside of the synagogue, there was always a lot of people around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in saying that, like, I don't really know anything about her personally. Like, I don't know who her friends are. I don't even know if she had a boyfriend. I mean, she could have been, a lesbian. She could have had a girlfriend. Like, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
any of those details about her. I don't know who her close personal friends are. I don't know, like, all my I'll call it professional settings because it was like Jewish settings or uh activist settings. So like I never met
Mm-hmm.
her in a professional setting like business. But I'm just saying like I don't know anything about her personally actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just in
Mm.
through the Jewish community and activist.
Yes.
So I mean if you ask me like, did she ever have a boyfriend? I was like, honestly, I have no idea. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw the funeral, it looked like some guy said he was. I mean, he said it in a weird way. He said he used to be your roommate. So I don't know if he used to be your boyfriend or roommate. It could have been platonic. And but like so if you ask me, like I don't know if she ever had a boyfriend. I don't have any of that information. She never posted on Facebook. Um, I don't know who her close friends are. Um, anything like that.
Well, it will all come out in the wash, I suppose.
It might not. Also, like saying, like God forbid, like it could be a mystery that remains unsolved. So if they do question the leads, if they think it was someone close to her, and then they determine that none all those leads come out dry, uh, it could remain unsolved. And God forbid, this is a big case, like international media attention. They brought in the FBI. However, in Detroit, like 75% of murders are unsolved.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But do you know if she lived in what, a house or flat or anything? Or-
well,
I mean, it sounds like
a
she lives
townhouse,
on the ground floor.
like 10 years ago, when her sister got married, she made like a party for her sister in her apartment that like 20 people were at, and she invited me. So that like, but that was like on the 15th floor of a apartment building, and she moved. Obviously, that was like 10 years ago. She's not in the same apartment, and that was
Mm-hmm.
an event. Like, so I was in her apartment 10 years ago at an
Mm-hmm.
event that like 20 people were at. Um, it was a townhouse, and I don't know exactly the location, but she had moved and she had a townhouse. They said, and but I'm not familiar with it or even the neighborhood.
Yes, for some reason I assumed it was, somewhere on the ground floor because she was found outside and
Yeah, I mean, townhouse would mean like condominiums, like a house, but they're attached. So,
yes,
um,
right.
and
But ground floor, I suppose, is what I
yeah, or in
okay,
townhouse, it might be 2 floors. It
mm,
might be. I mean, I'm not sure, but a lot of townhouses are 2 floors, or sometimes in New York, sometimes they're 3 or 4 floors. But whatever it is, it's probably, I just guess if it's a townhouse, it's probably 2 stories, and they're just attached, meaning that there's no yard. There's all it's like apartment complex, but it has outdoor separate entrance for each unit.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And even just to speculate, like if she was going after the person who stabbed her, and then they took off and she was going after them, or like God forbid, like she's just seriously injured, and they said her cell phone was on her. That they did say that she didn't call 911, or I mean, God forbid, it's hard to even fathom, but like why she would have went outside. But the police clearly said that she was stabbed in her house, her townhouse, and then afterwards walked outside. But and why she did that, they one of the press actually asked the police of chiefs at the press conference why they thought she went outside, and they didn't have an answer to that.
well, I suppose to seek help,
Well, they said
right? I
she
mean,
had her cell phone on her. They also said that she had her cell phone on her when they found her, that if she could have called 911, or if she was going after the person who did it to her, God forbid.
mm, but I'm just assuming that if you've been stabbed multiple times, you might not be able to call anyone, even if you did have your cell phone on you.
Yeah, my God, I mean, the police thing, like, just because she's so well liked in the community, had so many friends, just to think about, or to publicly pontificate, or uh,
Mm,
I don't think they release crime scene photos like that or give more details, but I mean, it sounded like they said they're likely to release more details in a few days. It's just the
yes,
current state of the investigation that could get in the way of the investigation, and they made it unclear. He said like he couldn't. He used the common expression like I can't confirm or deny, but it seemed to lean towards that they have a prime suspect.
yes,
And that's why
yes.
therefore they could say that they didn't think it was anti-Semitic or a hate crime, and they have a prime suspect. And they even said that if there is a prime suspect, that they're cooperating.
Mm. Or it is being interviewed even now. Mm.
Yeah, and I mean, so if that's the case, like they're pretty sure that it's somebody, but there's no evidence now, and they either need to find evidence or get a confession. So, like, God forbid, if it was a jealous boyfriend or something like that, and they're almost certain it was a jealous boyfriend, and however, they don't have the weapon, they don't have the murder weapon, and they don't have enough evidence, so they either have to compel a confession or continue searching for more evidence.
Yes,
And they also said
yes,
they didn't think anybody else is in danger, which is kind of a statement like, okay, there's a killer on the loose, but they make a statement that the person's not in danger, and so, I mean, God forbid, like I'm not in the same circles. Like I said, like since COVID-19, I haven't seen her. I don't know who she hangs out with. I'm not on a friendly personal basis now with the new leadership at the synagogue. So even like to ask around at the synagogue for an update. Um, so I'm not going to like my only source of information at this point would be the public releases that the police or news media do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, the funeral.
Yeah.
I didn't go to the. I almost went to the funeral, but I feel like the funeral is going to be so crowded, and I knew her pretty well, but I didn't know her family that well. So like to go to the funeral and try to like console her family. I don't really know her family, and so it was going to be like packed, and there'd be so many people, and so I didn't go to the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
There's a mitzvah, and I also thought it was if it was Orthodox, they weren't going to do it like an Orthodox style funeral. So like there's two mitzvahs related to the dead. One is called like they call it levaya. Like when you go to a funeral, they don't in Hebrew they call it levaya, and levaya comes from the word to go. So they say there's a mitzvah to walk 4 paces after the dead. So usually they take the casket out. They have the funeral home, they have speeches, they say the prayer, and then they take the funeral, they take the casket. Jewish funerals are closed casket to
Mm-hmm.
the hearse, I think it's called, the car that they're going to take to the graveyard, and then
Mm-hmm.
everyone walks after the casket 4 steps, and that's considered actual mitzvah to walk after the dead for 4 steps, and then there's another mitzvah to bury the dead. So at most Orthodox funerals, and even some Jewish funerals in general, that um, they when you get to the graveyard, the hole's already dug up, so they have the hole, and then they have the pile of dirt and shovels, and
Mm-hmm.
after the casket is put in the ground, it's considered a mitzvah to take a shovel of dirt and cover the dead. There's
Mm-hmm.
2 mitzvahs related to a funeral, but I think at this funeral, but 1, because God forbid it's still an open murder investigation, 2, because there's like high level like politicians and VIPs in attendance, and 3, just because there would have been so many people, it's probably a large crowd that it wouldn't have been a traditional funeral. So I don't know if you've ever been to a Jewish funeral and seen what I'm talking about.
No, no, I haven't. But the throwing
Like in New
of
York, if
earth
there's
on
a
the
big rabbi,
of.
they'll close down the street. So because you're supposed to walk after the dead, there'll be a procession for like a
Mm-hmm.
block or something. So like
Mm-hmm.
the Levaya, you're supposed to walk after the dead, and especially if they're a righteous person, you want to walk after their way. They'll close down the street, and for a few blocks, and the car carrying the casket will go slowly, so that people could walk after it for a few blocks. Um, but it said like I don't think the funeral is going to be like that. And then at a regular Jewish funeral, um, after the funeral's in the funeral home, and then the cars all follow to the graveyard, and then at the graveyard there's usually a final kaddish said, and then the casket's put in the ground, and then people will put like a scoop or two of dirt in a line, and like usually it's a huge pile. Like if they put the casket like 6 feet under, or however, and it's usually a huge pile of dirt. So like hundreds of people could do a few scoops of dirt on the dead. So if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever been to a Jewish funeral, especially an Orthodox one, that's the common thing where everyone lines up to pour a scoop of dirt over the dead, and that's actually considered a mitzvah. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think it was going to be that type of funeral, and if it was, like, yeah, I would have done the Jewish mitzvah of, shoveling dirt over her casket.
Mm-hmm.
But, like I said, I don't, it was, I watched it actually. The funeral home telecasted the funeral, so it wasn't that kind of traditional wedding, and they had a lot of like political VIPs and um, non-Jews and various people or news reporters and media, and so it wasn't. the traditional type funeral, and even to go over like because I met her parents and her sister. Like I said, I was at her apartment that one time when her sister got married, and they had an
Mhm.
event in her apartment. But like to go over and like tell her mother like you remember me from like 8 years ago, or like maybe we met 2 or 3 times. Um, and she might not even remember me, so I like wait in line and try to like give my condolences to their parents, and they probably don't even remember me.
Yeah. Oh yes, I found the website where you can watch the funeral. She's got a white casket, hasn't she? It's on the CBS website.
Yeah, I mean, it's a local funeral parlor.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it
Hmm.
was such a prominent news story that news channels even broadcast the funeral by saying like that because of that you weren't actually able to do the traditional mitzvahs related to a funeral
Right.
because it was such a media covered, politicians and an open murder case where maybe even police and various things that you wouldn't have been able to do the mitzvah related to care of the dead.
I see.
And I don't know, like God forbid, um, I mean London. I think we discussed it. They have societies called the Chesed Shel Emes, which means the kindness of truth, but they're it's a euphemism for burial societies. And according to Jewish law, um, and if you've been following what's happening in Israel, um, you're supposed to collect all of the blood and bury it together with the person. So like I don't know if like so like in Israel where you have like the terrorist sites or the um even what happened, so after it's all over, eventually the Chesed Shel Emes will come and they will collect all of the blood and bury it together with the person, whatever the superstition related to that is. So I don't know if they did that with her.
Yes, I think for
So if there was
funerals you.
blood splattered, I mean, unfortunately in Israel with terrorism, it happens quite frequently. But if there was blood all over the place in her apartment and on the street to where she was found, that according to strict Jewish law, they should collect all of the blood and and there's various methods to absorb blood. Like I'm not. I mean, London, there's definitely a Chesed Shalem society, but like if there was a case like someone got hit by a car or there's a horrible injury, there are methods to gather the blood from like concrete or something, or even the grass, or various
Mhm.
things like that, or maybe. So I don't know if they did that for her. Because she was you're just conservative, or if she wasn't orthodox like that.
Right, because I understand that I mean one of the procedures which I believe is optional for the deceased is that the blood is drained and embalming fluid injected to make the deceased look healthier
No,
and
they're
then
closed
get all
casket
that.
funerals. No, they definitely don't do that. I mean, they clean up, so they'll wash the body, clean the body, but no, I mean it's closed casket funerals, and I think the police said they performed an autopsy on her, and so also often um, Orthodox Jews will reject an autopsy because you're not supposed to disturb the dead, and so the police said they did perform an autopsy on her, but if she was Orthodox, they probably would have. Even at the case of making it less likely to catch the murderer, they
Yes,
uh,
yes, Rabbi Kahane apparently refused
yeah, I mean
his
it's
yeah.
semi common. I mean, God forbid that. I mean, it shouldn't be common, but I'm saying that either Jews dying of an accident or murder, car accident, or various cases where even though there's an active investigation, the autopsy would benefit the investigation. That Orthodox Jews um, reject the
Refuse it.
autopsy, and
Mm.
sometimes it's even legal. I had a friend who was a chaplain, and he had a few cases like that where he had to go to court to suppress the autopsy because sometimes the family could just reject the autopsy, but in some municipalities, it's an open investigation, and the police want to do an autopsy even though the family doesn't want it because the police have their own interest and say, well, it's not your right as the family to reject the autopsy because
Mhm.
the solving the investigation is a public interest. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that has been brought to court in the United States a few times. And the
Mhm.
court in the United States is usually, I think, maybe even always sided with the ability to reject the autopsy. But that wasn't the
Mhm.
case. They did an autopsy here. The police mentioned it. So, like
Mhm.
in the case, like it said, she wasn't like fully orthodox like that, where they would have rejected the autopsy, and whether they had a Chesed Shel Emes Jewish society that would have preserved the blood in order to collect it and bury it with her, they might not have.
Mhm. Yes. There'd be a bottle of blood?
There's special
That
like
sort of
chemical equipment that, I mean, because if it's on the concrete or grass, you can't just like wipe it with a towel. They have
Mhm.
like special chemicals or absorption type things that I'm not sure. Like I know people that work with Chesed Shel Emes. It's the type volunteer. Like most Jews do some sort of volunteer activity, and so
Mhm.
some people get involved in the burial society. And
Mhm.
like in Israel, there, because there's, God forbid, regular terrorism. So in America, like, um, you still have the burial society, like you have to clean the body. So,
Mhm.
and I think they might even give, like, they definitely aren't doing it like any embalming type things, but they might do some sort of um, like enema to remove feces from the body. I mean, there's some
Mhm.
sort of cleaning process of the body before they're buried that might even include like an enema to remove feces. But
Mhm.
I mean, so that they would do at the funeral home or a special society in areas that it's called the burial society. That's called Chesed Shel Emes.
Mhm.
And you know why? I mean, it's in the Talmud. Say the Chesed Shel Emes means the true form of kindness, and that refers to a kindness to the dead. Because
Mhm.
if you do a kindness to the living, um, it can't. It's not necessarily 100% altruistic, because the person could repay the favor. But when you do a kindness for the dead, there's no way for them to pay you back. So that's why they call it Chesed Shel Emes. It's a
Mhm.
true kindness, because there's no way, because they're dead, and you could no longer, um, you know, get paid back for your kindness.
Mhm.
So that's why
Yes.
you have the expression Chesed Shel Emes, the true kindness society, and that goes back to the Talmud of like caring for the dead is like, I don't call it the highest form of kindness, but it's the truest form of kindness because you can't be, the dead no longer can pay you back.
Yes. Yes, I quite admire the way you Jews um, kind of score all these blessings and these uh,
I think Muslims are
about
also very careful with the dead. I mean, it's probably part of Abrahamic law. I mean,
well, I
also
suppose
the burial
instinctively
is
we
supposed to
want to
be in one day.
treat
So
the dead
you're
with
supposed to bury the
respect.
person the very next day. So she was, um, but I think it's Abrahamic law, and the Muslims have very similar.
Yes, I know some British people complaining about them being last when it comes to funerals, because Muslims would want to be buried first. Well, not non-Muslim British people aren't that bothered. They might sometimes have the funeral a month later or something when there's a delay. I suppose the idea is that you want the body whole for the day of resurrection, something like that. Is that the reason?
Well, Yeah, maybe we should wrap up, but I could explain the Jewish theology. So yeah, I mean, so if you're Christian or regular secular American British, the funeral is going to be a family event, and so you're going to make the funeral on a day that's convenient to bring everybody together. So like my
Mm-hmm.
grandparents, yeah, I don't know how long after, but yeah, maybe even months after, because they you know, people live all across the country, and so you have to make some convenient time where everyone can travel and be there, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's a family gathering. But
Mm-hmm.
the Bible just says you got to do it the next day, unless it's Sabbath. So as if the person is dies on Friday, someone will push it off till Sunday. Um, and I covered this on a stream and asked the rabbi, uh, the um, maybe I did in my reincarnation stream, but the general Jewish theology is you have a period of 730 and a year, although the year is usually limited to 11 months. So, and it's related to um, unscientific speculation about decomposition of the body and purgatory. So, um, there's a purgatory period of a year after the person dies, and then theoretically they go to heaven, or their soul ascends. But and it relates to the decomposition of the body. The worst decomposition happens, so the soul is attached to the body, and the soul takes the first 7 days to um, fully detach itself from the body,
Mm-hmm.
and then for like 30 days, the soul might be hovering around the body, and then for a year period where the decomposition of the body, that most of the flesh, the like God forbid, what are we but food to maggots and worms. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, me and you will meet the same fate of being food to maggots and worms.
Mm-hmm.
But so theoretically, that decomposition uh, of the flesh takes a year period, and it's
Mm-hmm.
related to purgatory understanding. So the worst purgatory happening in the first 7 days. Um, in the morning, uh, for the survivors, there's a mourning period of a year, 7 days, also like seven. So the purgatory and the rabbinic supplication about the decomposition of the body and the separation of the soul for the body correlates to the mourning period. So for the first 7 days after a death of your parents or your spouse, or uh, you're supposed to sit shiva. It means you mourn, you don't leave your house, and you refrain from all your activities. And like shiva meaning sitting, like yeshiva, and people are supposed to come visit you, and um, comfort you in your time of mourning. And that's the first 7 days. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a mitzvah called like kriya. You're supposed to like rip your suit. So if you ever go to a house of mourning, you might see a person like wearing a suit, however it's ripped. And that's actually a mitzvah, to rip your suit like that. And so the person would
The
be bring
rending of garments.
yeah, the rending of the garments.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the people like sit on the floor, because you're in mourning, just like Tisha B'av. So you don't sit on a regular seat. You sit like on the floor or in a lower level seat, and people come visit. So and instead of going to synagogue, usually the person makes a minyan prayer service. So if you're in like my area, someone passes away, and then they'll be like, oh, you need to make minyan. There needs to be 10 men for like the morning, afternoon, and evening services, and then at least once during that period, you should visit the person's family. And generally you're just supposed to sit there and listen to them, or if you have positive memories about their family, you say, oh, they were a wonderful person, and um, such positive memories of their life, and just listen to them. The Talmud says you should just listen. Like, so you go to
Oh, you
visit.
sit with them like the Book of Job.
Yeah, and um, but that's for 7 days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you have the Kaddish prayer. So there's like the Yiskadal, Yiskadash, Shmei Rabbah, the only prayer that's said by congregants. So the prayer leader leads the prayers, but at the end or certain elements, there's a part for mourners in the congregation to say this responsive prayer. And you're supposed to say that prayer for a year, but the year is actually 11 months because I guess like God is merciful, and the purgatory period, even though it's supposed to be a year, God relieves the person after 11 months, whatever reason. That's the ritual. So you say the Kaddish prayer for 11 months, then on the year anniversary, and then afterwards you say the Kaddish prayer, what's called, they call it the Yahrzeit, which is German, meaning like the yearly anniversary. So every year after. So the first 11 months you say the Kaddish prayer every day, and then on the yearly anniversary of death, you say the Kaddish prayer for the rest of your life. And so if you have family, you might have someone saying the Kaddish prayer, uh, hundreds of years later by grandchildren or grandchildren and grandchildren. You have like lists of Yurtzeits, anniversaries of deaths that you say the prayer for them, maybe light a candle. Um, but the first 7 days are pure mourning, where you shouldn't leave the house, and you just sit and mourn and contemplate the devastation of the loss of life, and people come and be comforted. And then the first month of 30 days, there's additional restrictions, um, which like you're not supposed to listen to music, you're not supposed to go to any celebrations, um, you're not supposed to travel, or there's a series of restrictions that get weaker. So like the first 7 days are extreme restrictions, then the first month are lesser restrictions, and there's still some restrictions for the whole first year, and then after that, the period of mourning is over.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the spiritual uh, suppositions about what's happening to the soul in purgatory, and then also the claims, the semi unscientific claims that are made about the decomposition of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's typical Jewish ritual. If at your age, if you had Jewish friends, it would be like very typical. Like parents would be dying, and you would you were like, oh, like another one of my friends' parents died, and they're sitting shiva, and you go to the funeral, or then you'd go to their house to comfort them. And if you're in synagogue, you would see them saying Kaddish every day, like the males. And it's even said the original purpose of the downtown synagogue before the liberal takeover was so that people could fulfill the Kaddish obligation. So, like, generally, like we're talking about mincha and the afternoon prayer, it was actually in the mission statement of the synagogue that they took out. But so you have an obligation to do the afternoon prayer, and it's preferable to do with a minyan. However, if you're in mourning, meaning your parent passed away in the last year, you're required to say the Kaddish prayer 3 times a day. So one of the mission statements of the downtown synagogue was a place for people to say Kaddish, and meaning that like if you were working and you needed to say Kaddish because your parent had passed away in the last year, then you would be able to find a minyan, go to synagogue, and say Kaddish. So, ironically, that's something that they got rid of at the downtown synagogue. And like when I was first there, I was trying to recreate the minyan in order
Mm-hmm.
to live up to the original mission statement of um in like Chabad. Like most synagogues are older, so like if you're Haredi and you go to synagogue 3 times a day, like your whole life, but like in modern Orthodox or conservative, usually people maybe go to synagogue in their youth, or like till bar mitzvah, maybe a little bit around their wedding if they go to like yeshiva or study in Israel for a year, until they get married, or a little bit after they get married, and then they fall out. Maybe they just go on Sabbath, And it's when their parents die that they start taking Judaism more seriously and showing up to synagogue 3 times a day because of the superstition of the Kaddish prayer. And like I read a whole paper on one of my last Ask the Rabbis, like the Kaddish prayer supposedly raises the status. There's a Gemara story about Rabbi Akiva, and he's like walking in the forest and he sees this person being tortured or punished. He's like doing some horrible task, and every day he has to do it again and again. And like I guess it's an apocryphal story or hypothetical, but the Rabbi Kiva asked him like, "What's happening?" He said, "I died, and I was a bad person. I'm being punished." And Rabbi Kiva tries to help the person, but he says he can't help him because it's his own bad deeds that caused it. And um, it turns out that the man had a son, but the son wasn't circumcised and was an ignoramus. And so Rebbe Akiva finds this man's son, gets him circumcised, starts teaching him Torah, and then his son says this special Kaddish prayer, and then the man is relieved from his punishment of hell. And so that story is in the Talmud. The Kaddish prayer appears like 1200 years ago and rapidly becomes one of the single most popular prayers. And in the academic paper that I read, they actually say a lot of the theology was likely borrowed from Christianity, but in the Jewish theology, that it raises the position of your ancestor's soul to say this prayer. So, um, you go to synagogue and you say this, prayer, the Yiskadal, Yiskadash, Shmei Rabbah, and everybody responds, and there's multiple lines. There's like 8 lines to it, and each time, like the congregation responds Amen, and then there's a mantra in the middle where everyone says Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah Baruch Le'olam Maya, and the superstition is that by doing that and having a minion respond to it, that raises your ancestors' positions in the heavens. And
Yes.
and so it's the single most popular. So even in Israel, like among the leftist and like the Knesset, so like Kaddish is the single most popular prayer. But like obviously, um, it's not until your parents die. I mean, some people are like orphans or parents die at a younger age, but most people, average life expectancy, Jews, upper middle class people, is going to be like in the 60s to 80s. So
Hmm.
people wouldn't start saying Kaddish till like their 50s or 60s. Like if your average person, like a good Jewish family, their parents are passing away in like their 70s. That means like people are saying Kaddish in like their 40s or 50s. And that would be the point where they start taking Judaism more
Hmm.
seriously. And for that period, they would be likely to go to synagogue every day. And then a lot of people, like, after they're older and they go to synagogue every day, then they sometimes will go to synagogue every day for the rest of their life. And so, I mean,
Hmm.
it's ironic that the original mission statement of the synagogue was as an Orthodox synagogue in order so that people would be able to come in and say Kaddish. And then it, had the liberal leftist feminist takeover, and they got rid of the minyan and just did like democratic, liberal political activism, as opposed to, the
Hmm.
original mission statement of being an open synagogue, uh, in order for anybody that needed a place to say Kaddish. And that's like the aspect, like, okay, if you're superstitious and religious, saying like, it's like, like I must say Kaddish, like, find me a minyan, a synagogue, so I can say the prayer to make sure that my parents' soul is elevated in the heavens. And so, like, historically, that
It
was the
doesn't work if you don't say it in a synagogue. You can't say it
because you need
just
10
anywhere.
people.
Oh, it has to be a,
Well, I mean, you could have
has to be
10
a
people in your
quorum.
house. So, like I said, the first 7 days, you have to have a minyan in your house. So if you're part of a congregation or a synagogue, or you have friends, like people know, like, oh, God forbid, like, I mean, thank God my parents are still healthy, but my mom's, in her early 70s. But if my mom
Hmm.
passed away, God forbid, like, I mean, hopefully she'll live at least another 10 years, God willing. But if my mom passed away, that, people would know, like, okay, um, I'm sitting Shiva, I can't leave my house for a week. And therefore they would come to my house to help me make minions so I could say the prayer in my house. It's
Oh.
also like if you pay membership to the synagogue. So if God forbid, if my mom passed away, I'm currently not a member of a synagogue. Like I mentioned, Rabbi Shalom Morris, who is the rabbi at the Bevis Street Synagogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
That is
so
Marx, yes.
yeah, so I mean, just so happens that Shalom Morris, who's the rabbi there, brother is the rabbi at my synagogue near my house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But like membership there is like $1,500 a year. So like if I was a member, one of the things that they would do is, God forbid, if my mother passed away, Rabbi Shalom Morris's brother, Rabbi Yechiel Morris, here in my neighborhood, would announce, put it in the bulletin, encourage people to come to my house to help make minyan for the week after my parents passed away. And then also I would be able to say Kaddish in the synagogue for a whole year. But and like, okay, he still might help me out anyways. I'm not a member of the synagogue. I'm not a paying member, but because it's a mitzvah, Rabbi Morris's brother still might help me out. But if I was a paying member, that would be one of the services that would be like included in the membership, that the rabbi would help out and like organize and be like, no, we need 10 people to go over to this person's house, so he has I mean 9 people including me, in order that I could say Kaddish. So that's a regular part of Jewish life, and I've done that hundreds of times in my, within my Judaism over
Mm-hmm.
25 years. I've done that like 100 times, where it's just like, oh, you're Shiva and we need you for a minion. And like the 7 days after the person died, they need a minion 3 times a day. And it would be a typical thing like that you would be expected to be called upon in your community. Like, okay, like you got to do it. He needs a minion at the house and we're organizing it. Can we count on you to be there?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like in my area, like a community that would be, okay, thank God my mom doesn't have any health issues now, but let's say like in 5 years, um, my mother started having health issues, like, okay, she could pass away. Um, Maybe I would, at that point, I better buy membership to the synagogue, because if I don't buy membership to the synagogue, they might not help me out with, Shiva or making a minion. It depends on how superstitious you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, so if you're Orthodox, you're going to be superstitious like that, and you're going to need the help of the community. It's a communal religion. That's why it's like tribal and communal, because
Mm-hmm.
you're always doing things like that. Like you're saying, I know the fellow people in my community. Like I was in their house, um, at their weddings and funerals and the Shiva period, and these various things. So I don't know if anyone's saying Kaddish for Sam, because like in her case, her father is still alive, and her father would be the one who would say Kaddish for her. Her father, I don't think, is Orthodox like that, and I don't know if her father is superstitious, but like, so in her case, I mean, she was 40 years old. She wasn't young, but she didn't have her own children. You're supposed to have children to say Kaddish for you. So in that case, her father would say Kaddish for her, or she has a sister, she has nephews, or her sister has children, or someone in the community would say Kaddish for her, appointed. That
Mm-hmm.
like usually there's someone in the community that's appointed to say Kaddish for all the people who don't have someone to say Kaddish for them. And actually, in the Orthodox world, um, a lot of times you actually pay that person. So you'd be like, unfortunately, okay, she didn't have any children, and her father doesn't go to synagogue to say Kaddish. And if you were like superstitious, you would like pay a community representative to say Kaddish on her behalf, and like that person might actually make part of their living saying Kaddish for people. So like in a very Orthodox culture, that's even like one of the professions. You could be like a professional Kaddish sayer for the people who have no one else to say Kaddish for them.
Right, right. Mm, I see. It's quite a long prayer, isn't it? I was thinking maybe you'd like to say it for us
Well, you need 10
before
people.
we wound up. Okay, you're not okay.
And I mean, I could say, just so you could hear it. And, but yeah, I'm saying it's one of the prayers that you need a minion for. And no, I mean, it doesn't take more than a minute. And actually, on my YouTube page, one of the first things I did was Kaddish. I made my YouTube page to teach people the Hebrew prayers. And one of my first like popular videos was the Kaddish prayer, and I made like a transliteration. I recorded like a guest prayer leader, professor at University of Michigan, saying it, and then I put the transliteration in. But okay, I'll say Kaddish for Sam. I mean, God bless her. She was a friend of mine, good person. She was always nice to me. Never anything but positive experiences dealing with her. Um, so, Yiskadali Yiskadash Me Rabah. Bialma Dibara Kirosai, Viamlik Malkase, Bekayakon, Biyomachon, Bekaya de Kalbes Yisrael, Bagaladisman, Karu Vimru, Amen. Yehe Shme Rabba Mavork Leolam Olame Almaya, Yisbarak, Yishtabak, Yisbaar, Yisbarmam, Yisnase, Yisadar, Yisala, Visalal Shme de Kishal Brichu, Leela Min Kalberkasa, Bashirasa, Tushbacha, Benechmasa, Diamram Bialma Bimru, Amen. Yehe Shlomo Rabba Min Shemaya Vechaya Elenu Ve'alkal Yisrael Vimru Amen. Ose Shalom Vimramav Hu Yase Shalom Elenu Ve'alkal Yisrael Vimru Amen. And where they say Ve'imru Amen, the whole congregation says Amen. So it's not particularly long. The Kaddish prayer maybe takes like 30 seconds to a minute. And in a prayer service, like in the morning and afternoon prayer service, there's just one Kaddish for mourners. And in the morning service, there's actually like 4 different times you might say the prayer. And there's actually a song that was at the downtown synagogue pretty popular for the last words. I mean, it's actually a popular song in general, but there was a more recent song, O say Shalom, He who makes peace, Bimramav from on high, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Elenu, He who makes peace upon us, V'alkal Yisrael, and upon Israel, V'imru Amen, and let us say Amen. And because it was like a liberal version that it added V'alkal Yoshbe Tevel, and upon all of God's creation. So the classical, and this is actually in Aramaic, so the classical version just says in a peace upon Israel, but the liberal version added on V'alkal Yoshbe Tevel and all who dwell upon the planet to include Goyim. So this is more like upbeat tune. Oh, say shalom bimramav, hu say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisroel, ve'al kol yeshvei tevel, v'imru, amen. Okay, so God bless Sam, rest in peace. I'm sorry to talk so openly about the horrible thing that happened and the possibility of why it happened. So it's unfortunate, and I guess it doesn't necessarily matter to me. So God bless and rest in peace. Thanks for inviting me on, Claire, to discuss this.
Thank you, Doovid, for coming, and thank you for giving us a good understanding of Judaism and the life of Sam. Thank you very much, Doovid.
Okay, you have a great night.
You too.